Hey, Andre, I'm here. Oh, crap. Okay. Hey, Andre, can
Hey
you hear
Jamal,
me?
you back?
Yeah, I'm back. Can you hear me?
Hello?
Hey, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Okay. Yeah.
I was about to call your
Oh,
cell.
man. Don't fuck around like that. That's terrifying. No, I'm here.
Gotcha, great.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault lines.
And we're back live, coming to you from across the divided states of America. In the politically independent corner, I am your investigative political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
And in the left corner, I am the indefatigable, the ever vigilant, a burning ember in the darkness, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
Together we are Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. And Jamarl, I will pass the baton to you here.
Well, I appreciate that, Shane. So let's do this. Let's go through the headlines. Shane is not feeling entirely up to snuff today. So I am going to cover the headlines for the first few segments, and we may have one of our new producers come in and do them in one of the other part of it. But let's start. President Trump, in the news, President Trump has signed a stopgap spending bill passed hours before the arrival of a new government shutdown. The deadline for the next spending bill is now December 11th. You got that right. The next spending bill is a month, pretty much, when it becomes clear that the new president or the old president is remaining or taking over. After Tuesday night's debate between President Trump and former Vice President Joe Biden, the Presidential Debate Commission has said that it will make changes to the debate format, with an outcry coming from social media in hours following the end of the debate to give the moderator an option to mute candidates' mics. Wow. The debate moderator, Chris Wallace, has expressed regrets about the course of the debate, saying that although he did as well as he could, he also sees that it is a terribly missed opportunity. At a rally in Duluth, Minnesota last night, Trump said that he was happy with the debate, saying that the appearance had the highest ratings of any show on the history of television, and saying that he held Joe Biden accountable for his 47 years of lies, 47 years of betrayals, and 47 years of failure. Former Vice President Joe Biden railed against Trump for being the kind of guy who wouldn't let you join his country club depending on the color of your skin and your creed. Wow. Wow. 30 million people out of a job, and this is what we got. Americans United Airlines will together be furloughing more than 30,000 staffers starting today, saying the federal airline relief provided by the federal government. Right. The airlines say that they would need a stimulus of $25 billion to keep employing those workers. Researchers at Harvard and Brown University say the United States need to conduct far more coronavirus testing every day to control the coronavirus pandemic, analyzing how much daily testing the United States needs to regularly screen people, including nursing home residents, staff, first responders, and teachers, and has said that at a bare minimum, the United States needs at least 4 million tests every day to regularly test the highest priority people. But that, ideally, the United States should test 14 million people every day to expand to more, like students, food workers, and store employees. The United States is reportedly currently at a testing capacity of 1 million per day. Some wildfires continue to be born out of control in Northern California, with officials saying that the fourth person has died from the Zog fire, which burned more than 85 million miles since Sunday. It is also not far from the August complex fire. The National Weather Service says hot weather, temperatures, low humidity, and gusty winds are exacerbating the spread of wildfires and worsening the conditions of firefighters, and will continue to do so today. An attorney representing Kenosha shooter Kyle Rittenhouse has announced plans to sue Democratic presidential nominee Joe Biden and campaign for libel after the candidate shared a video last night which suggests the teen was a white supremacist. And last, the operator of the Tokyo Stock Exchange said a computer glitch caused stock trading to stall today. The worst glitch since computerized trading began in 1999. The Tokyo Exchange is the world's third largest by capitalization and say they plan to resume trading on Friday. Those are your headlines. That's the news. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. So, under normal circumstance, we get to, Shane would say, hey, Jamal, so what's the thing? So, under this situation, since I'm doing the monologue, the headlines, let's just go into the monologue. I would like to have a conversation about things that indicate the decline of a government, of an empire, and of a country. And whether it's an empire or whether it's just an individual country, it's almost secondary to the point of the people who live there, right? Let's go to this. That's a clip. Katie Porter. Now, Katie Porter is having a conversation and she's browbeating the head of a drug company. Let's hear the clip.
Do you know what this number is? Does it ring any bells?
But I think you're referring to my compensation in some way.
Yeah, well, in some way. This was your compensation in 2017 for being CEO of Celgene, and that's a lot of money. It's 200 times the average American's income and 360 times what the average senior gets on Social Security. Now, of that 13 million, about 2.1 million came from your company hitting yearly earning targets. And more than half of the bonus formula was based on those targets. Any increase in the price of Revlimid would also increase your bonus by increasing earnings. Isn't that right, Mr. Ellis?
If revenues increased and expenses did not, then earnings would be enhanced.
Thank you. Mr. Ellis, in fact, the Oversight Committee found that if you hadn't increased the price of Revlimid, you wouldn't have gotten your bonus. Mr. Ellis, do you know how much you personally received in bonuses over 2 years, the last 2 years, just because Celgene raised the price of this one drug, Revlimid?
I receive very generous compensation, but I don't know the exact number that you're referring to.
In fact, you personally received $500,000 personally just by tripling the price of Revlimid. So to recap here, the drug didn't get any better. The cancer patients didn't get any better. You just got better at making money. You just refined your skills at price gouging. And to be clear, the taxpayers spent $3.3 billion on Revlimid.
Sounds like he's a good capitalist to me. I don't know what the issue is. I mean, at the end of the day, does Katie Porter not know the goals and objectives of companies? Maximize your profit. He had a product that people needed. He was able to put that product out into the open for people to use. And as a good capitalist and a company man, he recognized that my company does better if I can increase the price of that drug, whether or not that drug is doing anything different or not. Sounds like to me, he's a good capitalist. I don't know if Katie Porter doesn't entirely understand the objectives and the motives that are built into a company like that. I have a drug. People need this drug. If we remove this drug, people would suffer. So we can increase the price of this drug. Hence, that's what he does. Not only does it for the betterment of this company, it also increases his wages. What reason? What reason? We do not do that. whether it's his drug companies or other drug companies, whatever it is. What do you believe that the company is out there trying to do? Now, Katie Porter's thing is, I want to embarrass and I want to shame this guy, but at the end of the day, this guy could walk out, get in his limo, stepping over a homeless man, call his company and say, increase the drug by 5%. I'm angry and annoyed that Katie Porter browbeat me in this way. I'm sorry, browbeating one guy doesn't necessarily get to the root of the problem. And if you, Katie Porter, believe that this is a problem, does the other members of your party believe this is a problem? Because at the end of the day, the only reason this guy can do this is because the government of the United States allows him to do that. Do you think that the government of other countries allows these people to get away with this type of, what do you want to call it? You want to call it robbery. I just want to call it good capitalism. No, other countries don't. Even Donald Trump, whether he believes it or not, when he's going out browbeating drug companies and saying we're going to cut the cost of these drugs and everything else, even he recognizes that this is an issue. Joe Biden just doubled down on the fact that he's not backing Medicare for all, making the point that I didn't support it in the primary and I won. I don't need to support it now. I'm making the point to you that if you, as a Democratic leader, believe this is a problem, then what do you have at your disposal other than browbeating this guy to change this? Browbeating is nice. Browbeating gets across to the American public that there's a problem here, that there's a discrepancy between what you would think a rational government would allow versus what this government allows. Great. I love that. And I'm pretty sure a lot of other Democrats look at that and like, yes, get him. I was watching Crystal Ball. She was like, get him, Katie. I don't care about this. What I care about is you and your position as a Democratic leader or in Congress doing something about the costs. You're browbeating the guy. I don't care if you browbeat the guy. You and your powers as government and your other party leaders have all sorts of powers and authority to stop him from doing that. And not just stop him from doing that, lowering the cost so you don't have to drag the guy in here to browbeat him. This is a lesser politics. You are in Congress. Your Democratic leaders are in Congress. But I think what you know, Katie, the honest truth of it is that even though you get this guy to browbeat him, behind the scenes, this is not the logic. Behind the scenes, the logic. And I only have to go to Joe Biden for this. Joe Biden and his team, talking to the Wall Street Journal, or for that matter, the Washington Post, or many of these other articles, made it very clear, I don't care what we said in the task force. I don't care what we said in the primaries. I don't care. When the Wall Street donors said, hey, we don't like this particular talk, they said, look, that's just because of Warren. We need to, get those people on board. When you kind of made the point that, what about this kind of public option that you're talking about? And it's, well, wait a minute, we're going to improve Obamacare. Why? Because they can. And because they can, you have members of the Democratic Party that realize they are absolutely incapable of getting anything done, even if they wanted to get anything done, because it is not the prevailing of the purview of the party to get anything done. Hence, you have this. Keep this in mind also while you're looking at this. A country, richest on the planet, 30 million people out of a job. And you have, 20-something million people that didn't have Obamacare when it was passed. Didn't have health care when Obamacare was passed or after it was passed. And you have another, 10, 12 more that has lost health care. You're talking about 30 million or more people without health care in the midst of a pandemic. And you can't get, the best that you can get for the Democratic Party is browbeating drug execs, as opposed to providing Medicare for all that has 88% support and 70% support from the public. You even have Democrats right now crying about the Supreme Court. Oh, they're going to take away Obamacare. Missing the point that if you indeed win, meaning if Biden wins, you would most likely have the House, the Senate, and the presidency. And even if that Supreme Court pick, while Biden is in office, gets rid of Obamacare, your party, 88% support for Medicare for all, which is infinitely legal, does not have to deal with those legal challenges. And Joe Biden just recently said no. Just recently said no. This is the decline of an empire. You have all of these people under the midst of a pandemic, and you still can't get your political leaders to do what is in the best interest of that public, even from the standpoint of a pay increase, which Medicare for all would be the largest in a generation. I'm making a point to you that this gets across this problem in regards to your system and your society, and how, as these things happen, and you can see the differential between what a rational government would do versus what your government does, you get to see a problem in the fall of an empire. think about all of the people that are in dire straits right now because of the things that are going on. There's a difference between the wealth of the nation versus not. The wealth of the nation is doing fine during COVID. They can work from home. They maintain their paychecks. Hey, I didn't even have to pay in order to get to work anymore. Meaning that even though I could work from home, I don't even have to pay the typical bills that I would have to pay. I'm telling you that there is a skew in your population between those that are doing well and those that are not. And a rational government would ensure that those that are doing not are made whole, because that rational government would understand that when they're not made whole, those people tend to go out and get into the streets and get very loud and get very angry at the discrepancy. Mitch McConnell has basically said, yeah, we're far away on this deal between the Democrats. And on top of that, you have this other weird instance that they're going to leave, or the issue of the issue associated with restarting the government. Your government can't even keep itself alive. December 11th is when the new spending bill is going to come up, meaning they're going to have to get together again to come up with another deal. If the Republican Party is in a minority, Mitch McConnell fully knows and understands that he's going to keep that from month to month to keep that government on life support, as opposed to having a government that can act. Because instead of doing what is in the interest of the American public, he's doing within the interest of his party, power. I'm going to keep it on life support. I'm going to be able to drag Biden or whoever month by month by month. This is what I'm going to do in order to maintain some level of power. It's nothing to do what is in the best interest of the government. I hope you understand what I mean. These are connected in the sense that a rational government wouldn't need Katie Porter to browbeat this guy. A rational government would have done something to deal with the material concerns of the population, as opposed to having 30 million people out of a job and desperate. And yeah, a rational government would not be putting the government on life support. This is a declining government. Whether you wanted to call it a declining empire, declining government, it's up to you. I'm just saying that it is irrational in the way that our government works. And to some degree, there needs to be a public outrage and a public demand. Otherwise, this is only going to get worse. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be back in a moment with a talk with our new producer and a discussion with Shane. Thanks all.
Fault Lines. Radio Sputnik. We speak your language. Find us at SputnikNews.com.
What do we want?
News, politics, and culture.
When do we want it?
Wait, we weren't finished. News, politics, and culture without the red and blue spin.
Okay, so now when do you want it?
Daily from noon to 2 p.m. Eastern Time.
Okay, satisfied now?
Never. Tune into Political Misfits on 105.5 FM in Washington, D.C. and on 102.9 and 104.7 FM in Kansas City, Missouri. Daily for our analytical fix. Don't surrender.
Fault Lines.
And we're
Welcome
back.
back.
You're listening to Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas and Shane Stranahan. We're going pretty immediately here into a conversation with our producer. We'll get into that in just a second. I just wanted to comment very briefly. Jamarl, there's this weird take. What about copyright abolition? Specifically in some domains, specifically when it applies to pharmaceuticals, or at least some pharmaceuticals. President Trump was pushing up against this almost in a weird way by doing price matching with other countries' drug prices. Why don't we just abolish some copyrights, some of the patents, and allow companies to compete with each other on the price of those drugs? And I mean, part of the problem here is that you have a monopoly fundamentally on the licensing of these drugs. It drives the prices up ridiculously. And it's weird. This is an example of horseshoe theory. I've seen both left communists, anarchists, and free market libertarians, people, you'd expect to disagree on practically everything. They're sort of sitting at the opposite ends of the spectrum there, in some sense, maybe. Both agreeing on this. And I'm not saying for everything. I'm not saying for music and for every sphere of life in which copyrights are effective. But for pharmaceuticals, that there might be a case there. Again, just a radical idea. Anyway, what's your take on that before we go to our producer?
Right. I'm not against that. I guess there's another idea of if the government itself, let's say Medicare, a law is passed to say the only vendor of drugs in the United States is the U.S. government. Meaning your selling of these drugs is coming to the government. And if you don't want to sell to the government, fair enough. There are no other vendors in the United States. That's one idea. And if we're being honest, what Trump is doing is basically saying in socialist countries who have socialized medicine, who are able to basically do what I just said and lower the cost of drugs, the United States is going to tether their price to that. And you say, well, wait a minute. Isn't that just socialized medicine? No. We're just tethering our price. Like, instead of having Medicare, do what those countries do. Donald Trump doesn't want to say that because he'll get accused of, being a socialist. So what he says is, I'm going to tether our drugs to the countries, other countries, socialist countries. I mean, come on. Like, this is what I mean when I say it's just the irrationality of it all. Like, the dishonesty even of that argument that is being made. Like, I don't know. I get aggravated by this. But whether it's copyright, I don't care how it's done. I just care that it gets done. And this is one of those cases where it's like, you have a government. What is the government representing? Who should it represent? And if it is not representing the overwhelming majority of the population, that seems to be problematic to me. And so you have a situation with a drug guy who says, yeah, I increase the cost of the drugs. Why wouldn't I? So yeah, Shane, I agree with you. I'm glad we're in some agreement. However it's done, I guess the thing is, right? It should be done. Like, there's no reason that drugs should cost this much. But I agree with you. This is one of our agreement points. So let's do this. Let's bring in Cam. Cam, welcome back.
Thank
Cameron.
you. Good morning. Good morning, guys.
Absolutely.
Good morning,
was
Cameron.
a producer on the show.
Producer on the show.
I mean, not when I first started. I'm sorry. When I was first brought onto the show. When Garland and Lee were on the show, Cam was the one, if I'm not mistaken, that point of contact. Hey, would you like to come on? Yeah, sure. Absolutely. And it's been awesome the entire time that I've been coming back and forth to the show. And so it is with a great thing in me that says, yes, I'm happy that she's back. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you, Jamarl. Thank you so much. Yes, I was the one to make first contact with you, so I think I should get some brownie points for that. Thank you.
Yeah, welcome back, Cam. You used to be my boss. This is awesome.
Shane, you have really upgraded, haven't you?
I've done, yeah. Some things have definitely happened in that domain, but no, Cam's great. We're super glad to have her back on board. She's awesome, and yeah, she had a bunch of ideas and stuff that she was pushing for, and then everything sort of fell apart on the show. And now that we have her back, we're super excited about it. Anyway, we're just kind of bringing her on. What have you been up to, Cam? What you been doing?
I've been doing a lot. I like to stay busy. So I'm like, it's funny though, because I've been itching to get back get back into the media world and, kind of dig my feet back into talking about politics and talking with smart people every day about different topics. And I'm listening to you guys talk about the pharmaceuticals, and I'm so excited because my life kind of revolves around money. So this is going to be like so amazing for me. And I'm just so excited. You and Shane and Jamarl, you guys are really awesome and talented and smart. And then I get to talk to my best friend again, Andre, and I have Raheem. So I'm happy. I'm so excited.
Good to hear. That's awesome. Yeah, it's great to have you back, Cam. Thank you again for joining us.
Thank you, guys.
So we are going to get a bit of additional power behind the producers thing. So that's awesome. I mean, two is always better than one. So let's do this. Let's get into the news. Now, your take on the pharmaceutical thing, I actually like, because it acknowledges, yeah, that shouldn't be that way. And Katie Porter, who, look, I get it. In order to even make it known that there's a problem, you got to make it known there's a problem. And so her thing is, yeah, I'm going to go after this guy, whether or not her party backs her or not. This is, ideally her idea. My issue with this and my cynicism associated with this is that I have no way to believe that. Meaning, if Hillary Clinton comes out and tells the public one thing and then goes behind and tells her donors something else, it makes me distrustful. Now, yeah, it's a rational act. It makes sense for her to do in that sense. Dishonest, yes. But is it abnormal? No, it's not. I mean, even in the way we relate to one another, just as regular people, there's things that you tell one, but you don't necessarily tell the other, or talking behind the back and all this other stuff. It just takes it to a whole nother level of politics, because this is not your buddies. This is a public that is buying into something you're saying with their vote or their support or their cash. Well, Joe Biden did the exact same thing in the primaries, and I would wager to you many of these other candidates. When did Elizabeth Warren really back Medicare for all? No. She did. You could hear it in her speeches. You could hear it when she was talking about it, framework and all this other nonsense. And then you find out when she puts the bill out, no. You even found out in the newspaper that made the point that we didn't realize that we would have to come up with a plan for this. We thought we could just say we're with the Sanders. Did Pete Buttigieg and what's her name, Nancy Pelosi, and many of these other people, when they were having these Stop Sanders meetings, Pete never had to come on and say, yeah, I was part of that meeting. They were doing that behind the scenes. They were understood that we need to stop this guy. However, we need to stop this guy. When Obama was calling behind the scenes. I guess I'm making a point to you that the reality of things is different than the optics of things. And when you are presented with perpetual theater, what is the audience supposed to think? Is the audience supposed to get to the point of being dejected and looking at this as, this is theater, I see it for what it is? Or is it supposed to take it with a certain reality? My dad, and I'll leave it here, my dad comes home one time. My mom and dad were never married. And on top of that, he was rarely around. And flagrant habitual liar. And my dad would do this thing where he would lie, and then he would not show up for months. So it's like when he comes back later, it's as if the lie somehow vanished. It does the Macron thing, where Macron says, okay, I'm going to negotiate, hopefully, and spread out the protests. So you try to cut the energy of the protests over a period of time. Well, same thing with a person. He comes to the house one day, and he breaks down crying. And he's crying, telling me about, he has diabetes, and saying he wants to do different, etc. Now, at this point, I'm jaded. I'm apathetic to all of this stuff. I've went through my angry phase. I've gone through the phase of acceptance. And I'm looking at him, and I leave, and my mom and I are outside laughing like, what the hell is just happening? Now, that sounds wrong, but that sounds wrong only in a snapshot, not necessarily dealing with something over the course of 15, 16, 17 years. I mean, for God's sake, this is a situation where, you would have to go on a trip. Your dad is supposed to pay for the trip, and at the last minute doesn't pay, leaving your mom in the lurch. I guess I'm making the point that you get to these moments where, you can't believe what's taking place. And because you can't believe what's taking place, you're jaded when looking at this. This is where I am. And I think it's rational to be there. It's not like I was born trying to get there. I got here based on the things that was taking place. We have a caller. Tarif. What's going on, Tarif? And Shane. Actually, Shane. Okay, I said Tarif. So let's go to Tarif first. I'm sorry,
Let's
Shane.
go to Tarif. Let's do Tarif.
Well, screw it. Shane, you have any comment on that, or you want to go immediately to Tarif?
Let's go straight to Tarif for now. Thanks, Jamarl. Yeah, Tarif, you're on the line. What's going on?
Good morning, gentlemen. I have a comment about Trump. I think he have to change his strategy team because I see they're just focusing just on his base. Yeah, he have to start pulling from the moderates, the independents, and the left. As you can see, the DNC is focusing on pulling from the Republican Party, pulling Republicans to themselves. Trump team is not really doing that. So when they go out and they do the campaigning, if you notice, they're kind of just speaking to his own base.
He is Tarif, but think about that for the moment. Think about that. Think about what you're saying for the moment. The Democratic Party is pulling from 4% Republicans. Trump is saying this is a contest to get as many people out to the ballots as possible. And so I'm going to double down on my base, which is better. I mean, is Trump really going to reach out to moderates? Are there moderates that say, yeah, I think Trump is great? So for his framing of this is a contest to get as many people out to the ballots as possible. This is not a contest of expansion. The Democrats, just like Hillary Clinton tried to expand into Republicans, didn't work. I mean, you might get the Romney types, but you're talking about 4%. The overwhelming majority of Republicans are backing Trump because he's Trump. Trump knows that. So which strategy do you think is better? I mean, Democrats can cow their base because their base is terrified of Trump, so they're cowards. They'll vote for him. But Trump's base is not terrified in that way. So the strategies are different. Think about what you're saying. Which one is a better one? And I could be wrong. That's what I'm asking you. I'm not saying this as if I know this is a flat fact. But I guess I'm pushing back on this notion that you should back your base because your base is the thing that's going to win that for you. Or do you think I'm wrong on that?
Well, no, I like your opinion on that, but check this out, Jamal. The Democrats know, just like you said, that they got the leftists in the corner already. Trump have to have the same type of mentality with his base. It's almost like you got a woman that loves you already.
Wait. But is Trump base stuck?
You love her?
Wait. Is Trump base stuck like that? That's what I'm telling you. I think these are two different mindsets. I think the Democratic mindset, lefties and progressives and whatnot, is I need to throw myself at whoever this guy is to stop the other guy. Meaning, it's not about I'm voting for the best interest of me, my population, my tribe, or whatever else. It's I am so terrified. I'm peeing myself right now when I'm going to the polls in order to vote for Joe Biden. That's Democrats.
But also, we didn't hear Tariq out. We don't know he wasn't done talking.
Oh, my bad. I'm pushing back on what he's saying, but I'm letting him talk. But I guess I'm trying to angle this in a particular way. I'm just making a point to you, Tariq, that the Democratic base is terrified. The Republican base, I don't think that is. Like, is there honesty there? Like, is there something there? Or do you just disagree? Or do you think, no, Trump really does need to reach out to moderates?
Yes, Trump, this is a presidential race. He's the president. You got a president, a candidate. You got Joe Biden running. You want to get as many people on your side as possible. It's like I was trying to say. He's talking to a group of people that's already backing him. So it won't matter if he say, okay, I'm going to put out there single payer or legalize marijuana for medical use. Of course, they're going to be mad with him, but they ain't going to leave him, Jamal. That's what he have to start pulling from the left. He have to start pulling from the independents. He got to get rid of people like around him that's similar to like Ben Shapiro, the Crowder crowd, and Gavin McInnes. He need to put people around him like Tucker Carlson or Larry Elders.
I think
you're
right.
You know what I'm saying?
Sharif, I think you're 100% right. I'll be honest. I'm at this point. I'm sorry, but we've got to go into a break. I'm gonna be stepping in now. Thank you for the call, Sharif. I think you're absolutely right. Trump can do that. He has the opportunity to do that. He has enough of an allegiance with the MAGA crowd. There is like a very strong cohort there. And if he starts to make some of those concessions, I could see him actually, reshaping things in some way, maybe even reshaping the Republican Party, what that looks like, what it means in the long run. In any event, thank you for the call, Tariq. Let's go into a break. We'll be back in a minute. You're listening to Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas and Shane Stranahan.
Great call, Tariq.
Fault Lines.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
By Any Means Necessary is your guide to the movement and efforts shaping the world around us, from mass incarceration.
No longer am I interested in or concerned with prison reform. I am interested only in the eradication of prisons.
To the battle between police and water protectors.
It was a pretty punishing disregard for the sanctity of human life, that unleashing water cannons on peaceful, prayerful water protectors.
From efforts to protect the environment.
The climate movement is ready to, with plenty of opposition research and force and strength, along with, the right of both science and morality, to fight them on this.
To the movement for Black Lives.
When I first saw the Michael Brown video, when I saw that it clearly contradicted the narrative put forth by the Ferguson Police Department and by police supporters in general, 3 words came to mind. Color me shocked.
Stay tuned to By Any Means Necessary, 5 days a week here on Radio Sputnik. Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas and Shane Stranahan. And our guest for this segment and the next, Laith Marouf, award-winning multimedia producer and media policy and law consultant, working with focused on issues of liberation and decolonization from indigenous nations to Arab peoples and building broadcasting capabilities for misrepresented and underrepresented communities around the world. Laith, thank you for joining us this morning. How are you doing?
Good. It's great to always be with you guys.
Great to have you back. Yeah, for those listening, we've often had Laith on to talk about Lebanon, Lebanese issues, specifically in the wake of this bombing, but he's been joining us for years to talk about regional issues in the Middle East. This morning, we're going to start off with something a little bit different, actually. We're going to start off with a Facebook censorship. I hear that you were censored for 30 days, and then after like 20 minutes, within half an hour, you were pushed off of Facebook again for another 30 days. This just happened. Could you give us a bit of a history here, Laith? What happened? Sad to hear this, first of all. But what happened? What's your perspective on this, Laith?
So I was reporting live translated quotes from a speech by Hassan Nasrallah, the Secretary General of Hezbollah, that was happening last month. And at the end of my reporting, they handed me a 38-day ban for one of those posts. And no matter what I tried, they didn't let me back on. So yesterday, that 30-day ban was over. I got on and I, informed my followers that I'm back on. And within this 10, 20 minutes, I received another notification from Facebook banning me for another post from that same reporting a month ago from the speech. And again, I have no way to contest that. And I'm banned for another 30 days. And, this means like 2 months of this year, I'll not be on Facebook. Who knows if they're going to ban me again a third time at the end of these 30 days. And then maybe I'll be forever banned from Facebook. This is the procedure. And it's clearly targeting my account because it's now has a huge reach for people around the world that are interested in issues of the Middle East.
What was the reporting that they banned you on?
Basically, I was doing, minute-by-minute translation of the speech by Hassan Nasrallah, the Secretary General of Hezbollah. And so I wasn't putting any opinion. I was just translating different quotes from the speech as it happened.
Basically, the translation of the speech in and of itself to an American audience was problematic. This gets to the whole TikTok stuff, right? When they're arguing that TikTok is a Chinese company. And then we have like Facebook, Twitter, basically banning things that they don't particularly like. Not because it's like pushing any particular thing, but more so just the very translation of something from some other country or some leader of some other country in and of itself is enough to get you kicked off of Facebook. That's what I'm understanding.
Yes, definitely. And, this is really awkward because this, speech was being broadcasted live on tens of stations around the world, with even streaming on Facebook itself on those stations. So there's no logic behind it except the fact that this was being translated to an audience that they didn't want to access that information.
This is also just weirdly in line with, their categorization of Hezbollah as a terrorist organization. We've had guests on to talk about this a bit before, but my guess here is not just that they don't like the content of the speech, but they don't like who you're sourcing it from. But this, again, is just a weird disjuncture between specifically America's view of Lebanon, America's view of Hezbollah, and as far as I can tell, the rest of the world's view of that organization. Could you just give us a bit of information about that, why America treats them differently, where that's coming from, Laith?
I think their main problem is that Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah is a very eloquent speaker and is able to deliver the message to a wide audience with very little information, background information. So here you have a speaker that is able to reach the audience, is accessible, and is able to compete with the narrative presented by the imperial forces. Today we saw Twitter announce that it banned hundreds of accounts that are supposedly based in Iran that were commenting on the American presidential debate. And they're claiming that these, accounts, just by commenting on the debate that happened, are trying to influence the elections. So on the one hand, we have hundreds and thousands, if not, hundreds of thousands of accounts of Americans commenting on every country's internal issues. Nobody gets banned. But the minute that people who are living a reality of imperialism, that, in countries that, whatever happens in the United States, whoever gets elected, actually, it doesn't only affect the lives of Americans. It affects every human being on this planet, because we're all living in an imperialist age. So what happens in the U.S. is going to affect me here in Lebanon, is going to affect, people in Iran, is going to affect everybody else, but we're not allowed to comment on that. So here you have a clear indication that all these social media platforms that are American-owned are now trying to control the discussion on these social media platforms and make sure that only pro-imperialist positions have prominent platforms.
How do the other nations regard that? Because I remember when, I believe it was Twitter, that got rid of Telesur. It was one of them. They got rid of Telesur. They got rid of accounts dealing with Palestinians. At one point, I remember them getting rid of the Iranian news site. Like, this seemed to be something that's rather persistent, where despite calling themselves this kind of open network and this kind of social media, it seems to be only social from the standpoint of Americans. And from other countries, if you have any alternate opinion, basically to stay out. This is problematic for me. And just to point it out, we are at the point where anything can happen anywhere around the world. Meaning you could have something that happens in the middle of, well, Lebanon, for example, a bomb goes off. If this was 60 years ago, it would take, several days to get the news on it. And in this particular moment, you see it instantly. Well, the same thing is true for the United States. Something happens, you get video and audio on it, or, you get a perspective. And in the same way that Americans give their perspectives on things going on around the world, you have other countries that give their perspectives on things here. And it would be weird and bizarre for a country, let's say Russia, to have an explicit example or perspective that is the same of Americans. So I do find this level of censorship problematic. What are you going to do in regards to your audience? Have you found other ways to get, for God's sake, the notion that a very speech from a world leader is in and of itself enough to get you kicked off of social media sites is problematic. But have you found other ways to get your point of view, to get your information out to a public for them to make their choice?
Well, I had opened an account with VK, which is a kind of Facebook equivalent that is Russian operated. And, unfortunately, when people from the third world are trying to give their message and their story to the world, people in Russia understand what is happening in the Middle East, as in terms of how imperialism and colonialism is trying to manipulate the reality here. So the audience in Russia is not who I'm trying to educate about the issues. So the main audience that we're trying to educate, people that are coming from third world countries, is the Western audience. And those people are on Facebook, are on Twitter. And therefore, my efforts to be on VK really, don't affect the global conversation. Therefore, until now, at least, platforms like VK don't have a result that is intended for somebody like me who's reporting from the ground in the Middle East. So until now, we don't have any alternative for these platforms. And this is where we go back to the idea of when you're battling for global opinion, you have to battle your enemy on every platform, on every battlefield. And therefore, I will continue to try to be on Facebook and on Twitter. I don't know how long they're going to allow me to be there, but it's clear that whatever I'm doing was effective, and this is why I'm being targeted.
Let me ask you this. Assange, if you're bringing up this notion of information warfare, one of the main people who used to basically put out factually, flat fact, true information that you could see it for yourself was Assange. And he is also basically being criminalized for putting out that information. What is the perspective of Assange in some of the Middle Eastern nations and the way that he was getting out information? One of the things that he's been in prison for now is the Iraq war tapes. Basically, the U.S. didn't know who they were killing. They end up murdering a Reuters agent. And the person who gets in trouble for that was the person who exposes it. How does the Middle East view him?
People that know Julian Assange in the Arabic world view him as a heroic figure who exposed not only the war crimes in Iraq that the United States committed, but also, if you remember all the diplomatic cables of the United States that got, posted on WikiLeaks and showed the how actually the Arab Autumn, what some people call the Arab Spring, was created, how it was manipulated. It also showed how over the decades the United States collaborated with the most backward governments and movements in the Arabic world in order to target countries that are trying to be sovereign, like Syria or Libya or Yemen. And so, in a way, everybody in the Arabic world knew this stuff and knew the history of it, but they didn't have physical proof for it. And now, because of the courageous work of Julian Assange and the team at WikiLeaks, we have definite proof of imperialist plots to assassinate, to manipulate, to put down any and all freedom movements in the Arabic world and progressive movements in the Arabic world. So one thing that Assange and his persecution have showed is that it laid naked the bullshit of freedom of speech and freedom of media that is the West has been shoving down everybody's throats while in the background actually manipulating the information. So he is definitely a hero, not only for the Arabic world, but a hero for all of humanity. And he's being, let's say, crucified literally in front of us. He's almost becoming like a Jesus figure in that term, and how he's being crucified in front of the whole public by the imperial order, and nobody can save him. He's going, until now, we don't think that he's going to be saved from the eventual, hanging and crucifixion that it will happen.
Hello?
Yeah, hello?
I'm sorry.
Can you hear me?
Can you hear me? There we are.
Yeah.
We are listening to Leah Maruth, award-winning multimedia producer and media policy law consultant, focused on issues of liberation and decolonialization from indigenous nations to Arab peoples, and building broadcasting capabilities for misrepresented and underrepresented communities around the world. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back in a moment.
Fault Lines.
Stay tuned to Radio Sputnik.
What's the most important hour of the day? It's the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon. On this show, we don't just deliver the latest headlines, we divide the real from the fake. Tune in to hear from some of the most brilliant political minds of today, get in-depth news and analysis that goes beyond the surface and dig straight into the details. Set your clock to the Critical Hour for a news perspective unlike any of those other guys. Tune in to the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon, weekdays 6 to 7 p.m. Eastern, and catch us on Facebook Live. You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I am here with my co-host Shane Stranahan. We are joined by Leah Maruth, award-winning multimedia producer and media policy law consultant focused on issues of liberation and decolonialization from indigenous nations to Arab peoples, and building broadcasting capabilities for misrepresented and underrepresented communities around the world. And I guess that gets to the nub of it, right? I mean, the point of it is not necessarily to give information to an audience that already accepts what you're saying. The way or the goal is to try to break through in audiences where you can change points of view in order to cut down on these notions of, or to give a point of view of, look, this is what's taking place in our part of the world based on what you guys are allowing. And I think that's why either Facebook or Twitter is so important in getting that particular message out. Can you give us a heads up on what's taking place currently in either Lebanon in regards, I mean, it seems like the focus has shifted a little bit or in American media, but this is not necessarily a focus that we've removed on our channel. So what has been the latest update on issues pertaining to Lebanon?
Well, they're still trying to form a government in Lebanon. The French proposal to form a government seemed to have faltered. The deadlines that Macron gave to the political parties here to form a government passed. It resulted in Macron giving this really horrible colonial imperialist press conference where he spoke in such undiplomatic manner. You felt like you were listening to Napoleon in the 1800s, speaking down to the natives. So this resulted in a speech 2 days later by Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, the Secretary General of Hezbollah, which was broadcasted and where he basically showed how to be diplomatic if you disagree with somebody, revealed the hidden proposal of the French in detail, and showed how actually the United States and its agents here kind of aborted this this proposal. What was interesting also about this speech by Hassan Nasrallah is that just hours before Prime Minister Netanyahu of apartheid Israel held his United Nations General Assembly speech, and he purposefully scheduled it for an hour before the speech of Hassan Nasrallah. And in this speech, Netanyahu put up these maps of Beirut and pointed to a location claiming that Hezbollah has a missile factory in this location. It was hilarious to see that within the hour when Nasrallah gave his speech, he came on air and he said, as I was driving to the broadcast, I was told that Netanyahu made this claim, and Nasrallah at that point invited all the media to come to the location within the hour of the end of his speech. So we had a huge media scrum. All the locals descended on the location, and it was opened, and it turned out to be just a metal sheet, like shaping location. It's a factory where you go when you want to make your metal fence. They cut up the metal for you and so forth. So it was a media disaster for Netanyahu. Once again, probably was the the shortest-lived Zionist lie ever exposed right on television for the rest of the world to see.
Let me ask you this, going along with that, I think since we've had you here, we've had multiple other nations, Bahrain, at this point, I think you were here when the UAE basically joined in with Israel, and there's a question about Saudi Arabia. And the reality of this is these governments were kind of working behind the scenes anyway, in this kind of coordination, even though the communities themselves might have been against these governments working in tandem with Israel in the way that they have been. What is proceeded from the standpoint of the countries themselves, not the governments? I get the leaders in power, but how has the governments themselves, let's say UAE, Bahrain, responded to this? And beyond this, what does this mean in regards to leadership for that specific issue in the Middle East?
So, the population in the Arabic world is very pro-Palestinian. It understands the historical facts. It have seen massacre after massacre for the last 70 somewhat years. So it is really, even if you take a look at Egypt, who had signed a peace deal with apartheid Israel decades ago, and the same thing for Jordan, who signed a peace deal in the 90s. So here's two countries that it's been, decades of supposed peace between these two countries. But the populations of Egypt and Jordan still refuse this normalization. So if there's tourists from apartheid Israel coming to Egypt, they are bussed along with the military convoys. Wherever they go, the locations are closed. Same thing in Jordan. When you go to restaurants, the restaurants will have signs saying no Israelis allowed inside the restaurant. So here we have, decades after the surrender of these elites in Jordan and Egypt to apartheid Israel, and they cannot convince their population to surrender the rights of Palestinians and or go along with this charade. So similarly, this is what's happening right now in the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain. In Bahrain, it's been now every day almost, there's demonstrations out on the street condemning this normalization. There's been, deployment of Saudi forces in Bahrain to suppress the populace. In the United Arab Emirates, there's a lot of artists that came out condemning normalization. One of them, she was traveling and was basically stopped by the authorities in the United Arab Emirates and had her passport confiscated. She's now basically under arrest within her country. She cannot leave because of her condemnation of the normalization with the apartheid state. So no matter what the United States wants and the imperial order wants, the populace in the Arabic world will not give up their rights of the Palestinians to their homeland and will not approve of the colonial positions. It's crazy when you think about how Israelis and the imperial order wants to change the course of history, wants to change the natural order. The Romans tried to colonize Palestine. They were kicked out. The Ottomans tried to colonize Palestine. They were kicked out. The Crusaders occupied Palestine. They were kicked out. And it's impossible to change that course of history and the relation of people with their land except with mass genocide, like happened in the Americas. And we are past that day of the ability to do mass genocide on that scale that happened in the Americas, which means no matter what happens, the course of history will lead to the end of the apartheid state of Israel.
Can I ask you something else also? I'm always interested in perspectives outside the country on American processes. Now, supposedly, at least going by the propaganda of it all, this is the indispensable nation. This is the nation that God gave the world for leadership. And then you see the presidential debates, right? And that takes place worldwide. And I was so embarrassed by that. This wasn't, here are two, leaders of the democratic world and all of this stuff. No, these were two old men who were crotchety, were limited in their ideas. There was a certain paucity in regards to what they were talking about and the scale to which they were talking about it. How did you see this, and how did people around you see this outside of the country?
I think people were, probably it was a very entertaining show for the rest of the world, because here you have the United States that claims to be exceptional, a light on the hill, the leader of humanity, humiliating itself. I mean, if these were the choices of electoral in any other country, you would have seen the media in the United States making fun of the vulgarity.
1,000% yes. 1,000% yes. I'm so glad you mentioned that, because if this was a debate, let's say in Iran, or let's say Putin, let's say Vladimir Putin had a debate with a political opponent, I don't know, and this turned out this way, oh man, you would never hear them shut up about it. I mean, even if it was, I don't know, any random place around the world that we didn't particularly like, this would be the top story for the next week or two. I'm so glad you point that out. So when you look at these two candidates, what was the perspective? I mean, outside of this country in regards to, okay, if Joe Biden takes it, what are the expectations? Because I would imagine any country outside of the United States, especially if the U.S. has a certain influence on that country, either through military or through some kind of media or even trade or something like that, would have to care about which one of these guys wins this race. Am I wrong with that?
No, you're not. Look, I just want to also point out that I'm married to an American and my children are American. I didn't apply for green card or citizenship, but so I have a stake in what's happening. My family has a stake in what's happening in the United States. And I was, joking with my wife, after we watched the debate, saying, look at your president, he's not my president. Look at your president and the opposition that is being presented to him. I mean, this is a disaster, but it's great for the rest of the world. It's great to see an end.
I'm going to have to end it here because we're going to hit to a hard break. But really, I always appreciate you coming on. I always appreciate your point of view. And so thank you for joining us. That is Leah Maruth, award-winning multimedia producer and media policy law consultant, focused on issues of liberation and decolonialization from indigenous nations to Arab peoples and building broadcasting capabilities for misrepresented and underrepresented communities around the world. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be back in a moment with headlines.
Listening to Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Fault Lines.
Live from the divided states of America, welcome to your daily inoculation for propaganda. In the left corner, I am the indefatigable, ever-vigilant, the last antibody to a sick and seizing political system, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And in the politically independent corner, still on for now, but out soon, I am independent political analyst Shane Stranahan.
You are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We're going to get to the headlines, but just giving a heads up, Shane is going to be taking the back seat. He's not feeling all that well. And I think we're going to probably be getting Garland in as a co-host, at least for this show. So don't be jarred by the switchover. And we're all going to give Shane the best of hope that he's doing okay soon. So let's start with the headlines.
Please don't be jarred. Also don't be canned. Neither jarred nor canned, I would say.
Right. Illness happens, man. We're human beings. And so it's just kind of part of the process. We, shape and move depending on what reality throws at us. But let's get to the headlines. In the news, President Trump has signed a stopgap spending bill past hours before the arrival of a new government shutdown. The deadline for the next spending bill is now December 11th. People who are looking at this channel outside of the world is probably saying, wait a minute, what do you mean government shutdown? And why is it only to December 11th? The reason it's only to December 11th, it's a stopgap from the standpoint of power politics. If Joe Biden wins, which I would imagine the Republicans and Mitch McConnell is probably assuming and probably preparing for, what they don't want is him to be able to have a long period of time to go without a potential shutdown, meaning the Republicans realize that they probably will be in the minority if Joe Biden wins. Realizing that they will probably be in the minority, they're taking a position, a stopgap maneuver, just in case, where the government will once again be shut down by December 11th, and we can set another spending to keep it, let's say, to February, maybe even to March. But we're going to keep it where we can use this as a way of dragging down the government so it can't pass any potential plans or ideas that they may want from the standpoint of the Democratic side. This is all party politics. That's the only reason why this is happening. And it happened under Obama also. This is America. The Tuesday night's debate between President Trump and former Vice President Joe Biden and Presidential Debate Commission has said that it will make changes to the debate format, with an outcry coming from social media in hours following the end of the debate to give the moderator an option to mute candidates' mics. The debate moderator, Chris Wallace, has expressed regrets about the course of the debate, saying that although he did as well as he could, he also sees it was a quote-unquote terribly missed opportunity. At a rally in Duluth, Minnesota last night, Trump said he was happy with the debate, saying that the appearance had the highest ratings of any show on the history of television, and saying that he held Joe Biden accountable for his 47 years of lies, 47 years of betrayals, and 47 years of failure. Former Vice President Joe Biden railed against Donald Trump for being the kind of guy who wouldn't let you join his country club, depending on the color of your skin or creed. American and United Airlines will together be furloughing more than 30,000 staffers today, saying that the federal airlines relief provided by the federal government basically wasn't enough. The airlines saying they would need a stimulus of $25 billion to keep employing the workers. Researchers at Harvard and Brown University said the United States need to conduct far more COVID-19 testing every day to control the pandemic, analyzing how much daily testing the United States needs to regularly screen people, including nursing home residents, staff, first responders, and teachers, and has said that at a bare minimum, the United States needs at least 4 million tests every day to regularly test the highest priority people, but that ideally the United States should test 14 million people every day to expand testing to more people like students, food workers, and store employees. The U.S. is reportedly currently at a testing capacity of only 1 million per day. Some wildfires continue to burn out of control in Northern California, with officials saying that a fourth person has died from the Zog fire, which has burned more than 85 square miles since Sunday. It's also not far from the August complex fire. The National Weather Service says hot temperatures, low humidity, and gusty winds are exacerbating the spread of the fires and are worsening the conditions for firefighters, and will continue to do so today. An attorney representing Kenosha shooter Kyle Rittenhouse has announced plans to sue the Democratic presidential nominee Joe Biden and his campaign for libel after the candidate shared a video last night which suggests the teen was a white supremacist. Speaking on that, also DHS has apparently put out information was revealed that DHS said to talk about Rittenhouse sympathetically, the man or the kid that killed multiple people at a protest he didn't have to go to. The operator of the Tokyo Stock Exchange said that a computer glitch caused stock trading to stall today, the worst such glitch since computerized trading began in 1999. The Tokyo Exchange is the world's third largest by capitalization, and say they plan to resume trading on Friday. And with that, you're all caught up. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. So one of the stories I want to talk about here that I find to be extremely interesting, and I got to be honest, there are a few, has to do with raw politics. Raw politics. Now, I am a sucker for politics. I think I've developed this from playing chess for the last 20-something years. My rating got up to, 2032. My master rating is 2200. So that gives some kind of context. Wasn't necessarily bad at it. But history and political actions ended up mattering more to me because of what's at stake. Mitch McConnell doing this, if you care nothing else, if you said the only thing that matters to me is winning, and somebody points out, wait a minute, you have to have competing concerns. Your job in this, philosophically, legally, is to represent the best interests of America. And in doing so, supposedly, your party is a vehicle that you're doing that. Meaning, America should matter more because you are supposedly an American. Now, in real terms, reality terms, none of that stuff is real. You're just a human being. But in the concept or conceptually, the area to which you're floating around is in a political system that is let's say, a structure over top of reality. And the people who are involved in this political system understand gain is real. Your ability to have leeway and your ability to have choice and agency in regards to what you want is real. And that realness may matter more than the conceptual idea of America. When the Republicans were working with Obama and they would keep putting the debt ceiling up, why were they doing it? Was that for the best interest of America, or was that for the best interest of their party and their constituency? And where does all incentives go? when I showed you KB Porter browbeating that guy. And I made the point that every impetus in the world, from the standpoint of this country, from the standpoint of what he gets from the standpoint of gain, and from the standpoint of the best interests of that company, was for him to do exactly what he did and increase the price of that drug. The fact that people were going to struggle to pay for it mattered less than the gains that his company, he and him individually were going to get. I'm making the point that the same thing is true about Mitch McConnell working in the political system. Yes, the best interests and their actions supposed to be in the best interest of America. Even if you individually agree with it, they should have a conceptual idea in his head. This is in the best interest for this country. Do you believe that that's true for McConnell? Do you believe that was true when they went with the Russiagate nonsense and basically stalled the country, which was, I would call, a political stall, to get rid of the fact that they failed miserably to a reality show host, and on top of that, to inhibit whatever actions Trump was going to do in that seat? The same thing is true for Merrick Garland. Philosophically, Obama was supposed to get that pick. Philosophically, the Republican Party was supposed to work in the best interest of the country. And even if they disagreed with Garland, even if they didn't like Garland, even if they hated Obama, they still were supposed to say, this is our president. This man won. The country chose him. This is his pick. And they may give Merrick Garland a hard time, but at the end of the day, they choose him because Merrick Garland is the most milquetoast person on the planet, and there is no reason that he shouldn't have been had to the court, put on the court. The point I'm making here is your politics has devolved not to the point of the best interests of America, but entirely to the point of what is in the best interest of the parties. And that is if you think that the country can persist like this, I'm saying you are insane. McConnell and the United States government is not doing anything for the public that has lost 30 million people out of a job. They don't care about the tens of millions that are going to get evicted. They don't care about the people who can't afford their medication, or for the people who have illnesses that extend beyond their illness with COVID-19. I think it was like 80 or 90% of people who had the illness have issues associated with it after the illness runs its course. I'm making the point to you that with all the things that avail your country, this is the nonsense that is going on in your political space, where they care more about party politics than they do about the country and America in and of itself. This is only one element of that. What is going to happen, what their expectation is, Biden wins. Biden takes the House, Biden takes the Senate, and Biden wins the presidency. I have a hard time believing, and think about it for yourself. Do you honestly believe that those people will go make a vote for Biden and then look down and say, okay, we're going to choose this Republican for something else? If they're voting for Biden, they're probably voting for Democrats downstream, which means that Biden will have all sorts of agency and McConnell will be in the minority. McConnell knows this. Do you think they don't game for this? They don't plan for this? Did you think the Stop Sanders meetings were random and arbitrary? They're political actors. They're supposed to pay attention to this stuff. McConnell is thinking, I need the ability to hold up Joe Biden any way that I can. He also knows that I need to get the Supreme Court pick confirmed, because whether Biden wins or not, we would have the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court will be a hedge against anything that Joe Biden tries to put through that's radical. But Joe Biden is not going to put through anything that's radical anyway. Shane, I don't know if you're still there, but what do you think about this? Basically, they're playing politics. And McConnell knows, that if Biden wins, he needs the ability to be able to hold up the government and lock that government down. And the debt ceiling, just like with Obama, will be the thing that they use to do it. And the question for Biden is, will you be willing to go over the debt ceiling? Are you willing to basically say, I am not going to negotiate with the Republicans on this, kind of like Obama did the second time. I'm not going to negotiate. If we go over it, it's going to be your fault, even if I'm the president. And that's going to be the crux, if Biden wins, of the next term. Shane, this is horrible, and yet this is politics.
It is. I mean, here's the other side of it, though. I see Trump spending decently liberally. I know that Republicans and Democrats are debating right now about the size of this next stimulus bill, but it seems like we're already breaking previous records, pretty much all previous records in terms of deficit spending. Are we just going to raise the debt ceiling again? I don't know that that is going to be the response. If it is, I think it's going to be dominated by conversations about reopening the economy and about ending lockdowns. And that will become the sort of debate that occupies people's attention, because frankly, we've talked about this a bunch on the show before. We've had modern monetary theorists on. People don't have a clear sense.
Wait, you mentioned something that is dramatically important. Do you remember when Obama and the Republicans, they were complaining about the debt ceiling? And Republicans were like, we can't raise it. This is money for my kids. I don't want my grandchildren paying for our debt. All of that stuff. I mean, they were flipping out. Oh, we can't do it. This is money that we can't spend. Trump wins. And they increase the debt ceiling by $9 trillion almost immediately. Do you remember that? Like, this is like, God, man. This is what goes into this notion of history, right? Where you live it and you remember it as opposed to having to read back on it. And that is exactly what they did with Obama, and I strongly suspect that it's going to be the same game plan going forward with Joe Biden. Like, think about the money that Trump spent. Trump wildly blew the deficit. And this was his tax cuts. Oh, tax cuts pay for themselves. They don't. One generation leaves and another generation comes in. And the new generation that comes in doesn't have the memories of the previous generation. And they think that what takes place is just normal, which is the reason why you can go from an FDR, you go to an Eisenhower, Republican, who basically said those who aren't on board for the New Deal politics can get out the country, something to that, if I can paraphrase it, to now, where a Republican, Barack Obama, who said, yeah, a few years ago I would have been a Republican, today I'm a Democrat. He understands that the moving to the right, and you have a Joe Biden and all of these guys now that basically would not even back a Medicare for All plan, would not back a jobs program, would not back any of that stuff. Like, it's astonishing. But I'm telling you, pay attention. Republicans are going to line up for the exact same game plan that they had under Obama, and it seems that they're gaming for it. It's sad. I mean, you talk about the declining of an empire, Shane, and a government that can't function seems to be one of the hallmarks.
It's true. All right. You know what? Let's go to a break. This is probably the last time you guys are going to hear from me. I hope everybody listening, I'm sick. I'm leaving the show, basically. Garland Nixon is joining us. And hope I feel better. And I hope you all have a great rest of your week and a great weekend. Thank you. But we're going into a break. You're listening to Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas and Shane Stranahan. We will be right back.
Feel better, Shane.
Fault Lines. Want to talk? Get in touch with us at radio@sputniknews.com.
Epidemics and pandemics could kill millions of people, and they actually did. Centuries ago, deadly outbreaks called the Black Death, the Plague of Justinian, and the Spanish flu ravaged countries, empires, and whole continents. Some of these diseases are still present around the globe. Others have become a thing of the past. Discover how these ancient and not so distant outbreaks from previous centuries differ from modern-day SARS, MERS, and coronavirus pandemics. Listen to our new series, Outbreak, the deadliest epidemics in human history. This week on Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines. My name is Jamarl Thomas. We're coming to you live out of our station from Washington, D.C. If you guys live in the area, you can catch us on radio at 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We're also kicking around in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. Also, if you guys are digging what Shane and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming this content on, give us a like and share that content. If you want to join in on the conversation, you can send us a chat, a tweet, and of course, you can reach us by phone at 202-521-1320. Again, that is 202-521-1320. Your engagement makes us show what it is, and so definitely don't be shy and feel free to call in. I don't bite all that much, but arguments happen. So let's do this. We were discussing basically a collapse or a declining government, indicative exponentially of what it does and how it behaves. And in this very specific instance, if we look back at what was taking place under the Obama administration, again, paucity of ideas, but you still had a Republican Party that was playing politics of saying, how do we inhibit, how do we stop, and how do we kneecap how this president functions? And right now, you haven't heard squat about the debt ceiling for 4 years. Think back. Think back. When is the last time you heard the term debt ceiling mentioned? It hasn't been in Trump's term because Trump has basically had the lay of the land for the entire time that Trump has been in office, with the exception of losing the House of Representatives. So now that there's a risk, now that there's a danger, now that there's a potential for, now that there's a potential for the Republicans or for Democrats to take it all, Republicans are thinking to themselves, how do we inhibit? How do we stop? How do we kneecap? How do we stump him in the foot to keep him, to hobble him from going forward? And so now you have this interesting thing of government shutdown. Garland, you're joining us, right?
Yes, I am. Glad to be here.
There he is, former host of Fault Lines, friend of mine, great guy all around, Garland Nixon. Garland, please tell us where we can find your show. Garland has a show also on Radio Sputnik.
It's called, the show's called The Critical Hour. It's right on Radio Sputnik. We're on from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern, Monday through Friday, myself and Dr. Wilmer Leon. We have a great show. And what we do is generally the stories that come out in the morning, the Fault Lines and the other show covers, we close the day by covering those stories and by kind of ending up the things that were found out during the day about those stories so that we can update you on the hottest stories, both domestic and foreign policy.
And by the way, Dr. Wilmer Leon, also another great guest. I think he's been on Political Misfits once or twice, and the guy is brilliant. So I would imagine that's going to be an amazing show between you two guys. What has been some of the topic, or what has been the topic on the agenda? To me, a declining government is a big deal to me, because when you grow up in a situation where there's poverty, where you can see other people having difficulties. I mean, one of the guys who was across from where we lived, he was like our neighbor. His kids would sit in with a candle in order to do homework. Now, it's commendable that they were doing homework. It's commendable they had a house, but in the richest country on the planet, should it be a situation where they can't afford to have lights? And same thing, there have been times when we came home and there were no lights. I guess I'm making the point that when you have, before COVID, 42% of the population made like $18,000 a year. That is nothing. And that is, sometimes with kids. And even when we talk about like fast food, and you have a lot of people who say, oh, they're just fast food, they shouldn't make X or Y. You even have people, weirdly enough, who are poor themselves, who might, let's say, make less than $15 an hour. They might say, I'm a secretary, I don't make that, so those people shouldn't make it either. Missing the point that it's impossible that you are also underpaid. Like, it's to have a situation where you have so many people that are unemployed, even, when COVID hit, and you have the government of your country that has a philosophical responsibility to deal with the welfare of the population. And that government basically tells those people to kick rocks. If not indeed, or word, totally indeed. I have problems with that, I have qualms with that. And I try to make this distinction to show people this is what a rational government would do versus this is what your government is doing.
Yeah, I think there's two things too that have to be of concern, and that is, number one, certainly the domestic policies going on and the things that we're talking about, the income inequality, the things like that. But there's a tremendous discussion going on worldwide about the collapse of empires. Chris Hedges has been talking about this, predicting it for some time, and people have been talking about how empires collapse, and the average age of an empire is 250 years old, 250 years, et cetera, things of that nature, right? But I think a big part of the discussion now has to include this. Yeah, the Roman Empire, the Ottoman Empire, we can name empire after empire that fell, but none of them had nukes. So what happens when you have what appears to be now a mad empire? If you look at our foreign policy that is clearly, deranged at this point. We are so-called confronting the Russians in the Black Sea and confronting the Chinese in the South China Sea. And we're, in Iraq, we're in Syria, we're trying to move into Sudan, et cetera. You look at a country that at home is falling apart economically and socially, and pretending like that's not a problem, continuing to act as though everything's fine and confront other countries, but we got nukes. What happens when an empire falls apart and goes crazy, but it has nukes? I've made this point. I made this point the other week on another show, and that was, we've often discussed, for years, and I'm sure heard this discussion about Pakistan. Well, if Pakistan were to fall, there's some ISIS type groups in the background. You'd have that a lot of countries would be concerned about going into Pakistan if the government fell and securing the nukes so that, ISIS-style groups didn't get their hands on the nukes. I think that's what I'm thinking with the United States. As this country seems to fall apart, who's going to control the nukes? I mean, if we continue into this downward spiral, who's going to keep some fruitcake from pushing from starting a war with China or Russia or pushing the button? I think that's got to be concern for all of mankind.
And this is why I blame the left. And I know people are like, God, why does he continuously blame the left? Why does he hit the left? Why does he keep kicking the left? Why do I keep kicking the left? Because I find it to be a philosophical, cosmic responsibility of the left to not allow your country to devolve in situations like this. My argument, my framing of this is, you got to deal with poverty. And if you don't let your country devolve into this notion of upper class, radically rich, and poor, horribly poor, if you don't let your country devolve into that, you don't let your country devolve into this nonsense. Meaning you have to be able to hold your political instrument accountable. And from the standpoint of lefties, they don't. Not at all. It's not even attempted. If you notice, when Sanders lost, the left's response, they were all sorts of bellicosity. They were belligerent. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. We're going to fight for Medicare for all. We got 88% support among Democrats. When Sanders lost, they immediately bowed, bent the knee because they were terrified of Trump. Now, this has been the case for 40 years. This is a Carter G. Woodson quote. I think Miseducation of the Negro. I read that book like 30-some years ago, and I still remember one very specific quote. If you lead a man to the back door long enough, that man gets used to it. And not just gets used to it, he starts to seek it out when it's not available to him. You win policy arguments across the board. Medicare for all, Green New Deal. The public is on board for this stuff. The Democratic Party is even more so on board for the public. Expansion of Social Security, legalization of marijuana. You can run the gamut. Sanders loses. Sanders backs Biden immediately. AOC backs Biden. All of these people starts backing Joe Biden. All of these lefty groups, the Sunrise Movement, all of these groups, all of these guys eventually say, okay, fair enough, we're back Biden. And none of them ask the question that if all of you stand out in solidarity on one or two policy positions, tip of the spear positions, and say, you're not going to get our support without representing our interests, and make a very basic argument. The party, the public, is in the midst of a pandemic. You have 30 million people or so that don't have health care. I mean, you had 20 million people, even after Obamacare was passed, that didn't have health care. And so now you have another 12 million or more that don't have it. So you have like 30 million people without health care in the midst of a pandemic. You have 88% of your party backs Medicare for all. Again, midst of pandemic. 70% of the public. You have no right or rationale to not back this. And if you're not willing to appropriate these policies and instead tank it to a man that you yourself call a maniac and the end of the reality itself, then that's on you. That's your fault. That's not us. We're representing the interests of the public in America. The left would have never thought to do that because from the standpoint and the framing of the left, they've always been told you have nowhere else to go. And they've appropriated that policy internally, even if it's not necessarily regarded to them outside of it. So even when they win policy argument after policy argument, there is no other thing in their heads other than bend the knee. And because of that, that's basically not having a candidate come in and get your vote, not having a candidate where you are holding accountable to what the public and American interest needs. That's the opposite. That's an inversion of politics. And so when you look at why are these candidates getting worse? Why are these guys devolving? It's because there's been no such thing as accountability in Democratic politics for like 50 years. And so now, even when you win the policy argument, and even when you need to hold the candidate accountable because the guy's a maniac, they don't do it. And hence, your country moves further and further to the right. There is no reason. What's his name reaches out to Republicans. Why? Because the left is a canned vote. And I would make the point that because it's a canned vote, it is a diminishment of our politics, and it takes us as a race to the bottom. So yeah, you do get a Biden, and you do get a Trump. It's inevitable in the way that you get it. What do you think about that, Biden? What do you think about that, Garland? Is there reality to that, or am I putting too much on the left?
I'll tell you why. I wonder. I'll tell you why. Because I'm wondering, when I say that, or when we say that, are we, and I'm not saying this is true, are we kind of blaming the victims in a way? Here's what I mean. People, you have to work so hard, and you know it, to find the truth, to find reality, to get around the propaganda. So much so that the average person who thinks the news, I've heard people I know that are knowledgeable people say, yes, I'm very well read and I'm very knowledgeable about events. Why I read the New York Times and the Washington Post. So the papers of record, the media outlets of record that people have been taught over the years to trust are misleading them so bad, are so corrupt that, I don't know. Yes, people should go out and do their own research, but they don't know it. So the question comes to my mind is this a natural element of the empire? Is this just the way the empire works, in that at some point an empire is so able to mislead its citizens, to hoodwink and bamboozle his citizens, that even a lot of the most well-meaning citizens are so misled and propagandized that if they knew the truth, they would act on it. But they barely have a way to access the truth, and they're so misled. So when I agree with you, but then I wonder, am I blaming the victims who are misled and propagandized? Do they really have a chance to know the truth for the most part, or how hard is it to access reality? That's the other part that I wonder. And I don't have an answer for that. That's a question mark in my head.
That's a question mark in my head too. That's a good point. Am I the cop that's yelling at the battered wife? No, you know what I mean?
Right. Right.
But I guess my thing is, when I'm pointing to lefties, I'm being very specific. Like I'm being specific to people who should know. That's why I make a bar on the door. Because in my head, lefties are the ones that have this craving that hates the fact that people are living on the streets, that hates the fact that people don't have food or can't afford to pay their medication. And yet, by always acquiescing to democratic policy, they basically allow that situation to persist itself. That's my aggravation. And I guess maybe you might be right. But I'm trying to point this to people who know better. Let's do this. Let's take a break. You guys are listening to Fault Lines, typically with Thomas and Stranahan, but we're joined by Garland. So thank you, Garland, for coming on. We will be back in a moment with Carbine Sabia, and we're going to be talking about the Democratic debate. Definitely stay with us.
Fault Lines. We are above all the latest developments, and we don't take any sides. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Shooting from the lip.
We're taking no prisoners here. Real opinions for real people. Where we bring you people with controversial views, and instead of trying to catch them out, we actually let them expand on their views. What's going on in British politics, European politics,
Carmine is on.
In world politics as well. And wherever you are, whether you're a UKIP supporter, a Tory or Labour, everything is in turmoil.
John Gaunt.
Shooting from the lip.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines. Thank you guys for joining us. This is Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We're joined by Garland. He's standing in. Shane is not necessarily feeling all that well. But joining us is Carmine Sabia. Just want to make sure I get that last part right. Carmine Sabia, writer and editor at large at the Sabia Report. Carmine, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm very good. You're very, very close on that.
Well, how do you pronounce it? What's the pronunciation of the last name?
Actually, you're right in certain respects, but I say Sabia. But it's there's like 10 pronunciations, and they're all pretty much acceptable.
I feel you on that. I'm sympathetic to that. Jamarl Thomas, and most people spell it with an R. I mean, with an A-L as opposed to putting an R in it. And even on top of that, you have people saying it all sorts of ways. They kill the name. So I appreciate it. Thank you for the heads up on that. I want to talk to you about the debates. Now, I have my perspective of it as somebody who is not a Democrat or a Republican and just kind of, float out in space somewhere as I call myself a lefty just for identification, but I probably wouldn't even necessarily be that. But how did you see it? I mean, when you watch these two guys on stage, what was your thoughts about the debates? I mean, a lot of people basically said this was the worst debate in presidential history. My argument has been that Trump won the debate because Trump was able to get done what he needed to get done, meaning in his head, he believes that he wanted to create a bar between Biden and the left. Because in his mind, the base, and whether it's blacks or whether it's lefties, are the people that are going to get him elected. And he wanted to be sure that those lefties knew that Biden was not for the Green New Deal, that he was not for Medicare for all, that he was not for defunding the police. And Trump accomplished that. He got Biden to repudiate all those things, while simultaneously Trump backed the elements of his base. So when he backed police, when he backed law and order, when he's backing or wouldn't necessarily say, no, I'm not going to condemn the white nationalists, whatever, he's backing his base. Whereas he got Biden to repudiate his. I think the problem with it is that he doesn't understand how cowed and how locked in the left is in regards to being terrified of Trump. How did you see it? Did you see it in similar ways, or did you think my analysis is somewhat off on that?
No, I think you're pretty right on that. And I think there's a lot of people, like you said, that don't care if Biden supports their ideas or not. They would vote for you or me if it meant get rid of Trump. You know what I mean? But there's a lot of people that it will matter to. But I think what the president has to do next debate, and I've argued this, and I was arguing it during the debate, is you got to stop interrupting, because the longer you let Biden talk, the more likely it is he will trip on himself and make himself look stupid and hurt his own campaign. You got to let him talk. Interrupting him actually saves him. And it gives him a talking point.
You think so?
See,
I took it as the more heat that was put on Biden, the worse Biden did.
Yeah, I can see the logic in that, though. I can see the logic in both ways. I can see the logic in allowing Joe Biden to talk, because he has been prone to making some significant errors. But I can also see the logic in what Trump did, Carmine, in that he was disruptive, he was caused some chaos, and he kept Biden unsteady. He kept the entire process unsteady. And I think if he felt like, or I don't know if he felt like this, I don't know if it was just organic, if it was intentional, but in that process, if you're in, the old, if it's a football game, the home team gets a 3-point advantage, gets a field goal advantage, right? If he walks away from this a debate and people are just shaking their head, kind of going like, what happened? I'm not sure. I'm a little confused. In a way, he wins. A tie goes to the guy who's in office. So I think to some extent, if Trump was able to create some chaos and make everybody unsteady when he walks away, because he's in office, he has that advantage that he gets from it. What do you think, Carmine?
I agree with you, which is another reason I would let Biden come to me. In wrestling and boxing, they call it the champion's advantage. The challenger has to beat you. Right. Beat the challenger. And Trump, he doesn't. The problem is with President Trump is he has one speed. So to tell him to take it easy, or to just stick the jab, is you can't tell him that. He has one speed, and it's pedal to the metal. So. But I
think I disagree with both of you on this. I don't think Trump had an in-game advantage. I think Trump was. Let me say it this way: do you think that there was any way for this debate to have came out with Trump winning it, and what would that have looked like? Now, when I'm asking this with a president that has 30 million people out of a job, that has 200,000 that are dead, that has fires that are basically engulfing the West, floods engulfing the East, and people, like tens of millions, supposedly going to be thrown out of their homes. And this is when the election is taking place. All of this is in the context of an election. And so with all of the polls showing Trump losing, and not just losing, like losing even worse than Clinton, and Biden taking the perspective that, look, all I need is the coast. Trump came out as he was an underdog and not necessarily wanting to be hit with all of these questions about 200,000 dead, COVID, et cetera, et cetera. And so to me, his approach was the only approach that he could do to get out of this debate without, let's say, failing. I mean, like, if that makes sense. Does that make sense? I mean, to either of you, like, am I wrong on that? I mean, we can go, like, Garland first. Does that make sense? Like, he comes into this thinking, I'm an underdog and I need to perform. I need to do something to change the course of this debate. In which case he goes with a game plan of, I'm going to sever Biden from his base. not realizing that the base is that cow standing out in the rain that doesn't have a leash on him or anything else, but just stands there in that circle. Does that like
Well,
Garland, how do you view that?
I don't feel that Trump is much as of an underdog as under normal circumstances. If you look at the dynamics, if you look at the economy, et cetera, you would say that the incumbent is in trouble, which, yeah, to some extent, yes. But here's Trump's big advantage. The Democrats have decided, have settled upon a strategy, which is no platform, no policy. It's just to say Trump is bad and we're good. To me, that's the best thing that could happen to Trump for this reason. With all of these difficulties going on right now, some of them being Trump's fault, some of them maybe not. If the opposition party would say, here's what we're going to do. These are the problems, and here's some solid policies that we're going to use, they'd have something to build on, and Trump would have to fight against those policies. And those policies, again, would serve to put a microscope on the problem, and they'd be talking about the problem. But what's benefiting Trump is that the Democrats have no platform. They've got no plans. They're just saying, we're going to bring the dark to lightness. And there's some weird, metaphors about how they're going to make things better. I think that advantages Trump greatly. Carmine.
But Garland, you're thinking too much like a lefty.
Go ahead.
And you're thinking too much like right. Now, think of this from the standpoint of somebody who just power politics. You don't want to give the public that stuff. You don't believe in giving the public that stuff. 90% of the elections are won by the side with the most cash. And because of that, the parties tend to focus, and accrue around the cash thing. The catch is the Democratic Party knows that it doesn't need to give a platform because the Republican Party didn't give a platform. And as such, rationally, if you are in line with people who are giving you cash and everything else, and you're working in the interest of your constituents, the constituents being the people who gave you that $1 billion, then you look at it and say, I can get a nanometer less than Trump and argue pragmatically that this is best interest. And you can represent the interests of the people who are paying you. I'm making the point that from a Democratic Party standpoint, it is rational for them to take advantage of the left. It is rational for them to take advantage of blacks. And in that rationality, to not offer those things and instead focus on Trump. Does that make sense? Like, I'm saying they're functionally, rationally, in regards to power politics, when your objective is not to give the public that stuff. You can talk about that stuff all day, like meaning from the standpoint of the party. But from the standpoint of
your objective is power.
Right. It's the issue of power.
Yeah.
And
no, it does make sense. It does make sense. I think especially when you have a platform that you really can't run on because you turn off a lot of America. When your platform is actually stuff that the people would hate, you might want to shut up about that. And, because listen, at the end of the day, if Biden wins, Biden's a puppet. He's going to do whatever he's told to do by his handlers.
Who's his handlers? I hear Republicans say that all the time. And I have no idea what that means. Like, what does that mean? So give me the policies that you believe Biden runs on that people hate.
DNC is his handlers. The DNC, I mean.
But what does that mean? What does that mean? What is the interest of the DNC that diverges from the interest of something that Biden may want?
I think that Biden, under normal circumstances, would not want to pack the court, but they do. And so he would. Biden may not be for defunding the police, and it doesn't really matter because the president can't defund the police, but they do. Biden, the far left controls that party now, bro.
How does the far left control the party? Now, I've sit here and basically made the argument that the far left in the Democratic Party is the horse that has been beaten and kicked and stands in the rain, stands in the snow, not realizing that there's no connections on it that can run wild. How? What power? Joe Biden, be honest with me. What power does the far left have in the Democratic Party? They're not for Medicare for all. They're not for expansion of elimination of student debt. They're not for the $15 an hour minimum wage or increases in that. They're not for expansion of Social Security. They're not for any of that stuff. So how? They're not even for the Green New Deal. So how does the far left control the party when the far left doesn't get anything that it wants out of the party?
Yeah. Hey, Carmine, and let me throw this at you, Carmine. I argue this. That's a fundamental misunderstanding that conservatives have of what's going on in the Democratic Party and points left. In fact, it's just the opposite. There is a civil war in the Democratic Party, and the civil war really is not between the far left and a far left, because I'll put it like this. If you look at 87% of Democrats want Medicare for all. If you look at the policies, Medicare for all, Green New Deal, et cetera, most of the party wants it, but the 13% who doesn't want it controls the party. So the fact of the matter is, actually, it's just the opposite. What's hurting Biden internally is that he is part of the right wing of the Democratic Party that opposes what the majority of the party wants. So I think while it's an interesting talking point for conservatives to say to their base, the far left controls Joe Biden, in practical reality, it's just the opposite. The Joe Bidens of the world are saying, we're going to move to the Republicans. We're going to appeal to moderate Republicans. We've got all of these Bush moderate Republicans that love us. So the practical reality on the ground is there's a war. It's the opposite of the argument that you're making, Carmine. But go ahead. Let me hear you. Let me hear your interpretation of that.
Well, wait. Let's do this. Wait, Carmen. We're going to get your opinion of this on the break, because we're about to hit a break, and I don't want to cut you off in the middle of your point of view. So let's do this. Let's take a break. You guys are listening to a feisty Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We're joined by Garland as a guest host, and we have Carmen Sabia, editor and writer at large at thesabiareport.com. We'll be back in a moment.
Fault Lines. We are talking
24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
You are listening.
We give you the most essential out of the endless information space.
Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Are you bored? Are you lonely? Do you need a hug? Well, we can't give you that, but we can keep you up to date on Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined by Garland Nixon as our guest host. Shane is not feeling that well today. We are also joined by writer and editor at large at the Sabia Report, Carmine Sabia. Welcome to the show. Now, we were giving you your take. Now, Garland and I kind of made the point that there's a civil war in the Democratic Party. Garland made it more succinctly, I think, in that very specific point. But I think my point was basically the left in the party is voting for Joe Biden, even by the polling. And I think you'd agree, even by polling. 70% of people voting for Biden are doing so just to get rid of Trump. It's not an affirmative case. It's basically they're cowed. How do you interpret that? Because I know the right says this all the time. Is this a talking point for the right, or does the right actually believe that the left in the party controls Joe Biden? Carmine? Okay, he may be having technical problems. I'm pretty sure he'll join us back soon. Garland, I think you're right.
But it's an interesting point. Leah, let us know when Carmine's back, because while I think to consolidate their power within their own group for the lead of the Republican leaders to argue that now Joe Biden, in every party that you go into, there's going to be, a right wing and a left wing of the particular party. In the Democratic Party, Joe Biden, Hillary Clinton, Tim Kaine, et cetera, that's the far right wing of the Democratic Party. Bernie Sanders, or the Bernie Sanders would be the left wing of the Democratic Party. That would be the what I call the FDR, the New Deal Democrats. So while the Republicans make the argument that they're all one, which benefits them, because let's face it, the Democrats are going to argue that the Proud Boys and the far right wing of the Republican Party are all one. So it always is going to benefit a party, any party, to point to the most extreme element in the other party and try to identify the whole party with that extreme element and frighten their base. I understand that's also normal too. But if you look at the reality of it, what's going on in the Democratic Party. And, it's far, far different than that. And it works within their base to say they're all one for Republicans. But when you look at it, it's hard to look at it and see that Joe Biden and his crew destroyed Bernie, cheated Bernie, and then to say that they're controlled by Bernie. And when he just criticized Bernie he's calling them socialists. They criticize the Bernie people and say they're controlled by the people that they attack more than the Republicans. That they say we're reaching out for Republicans. We're trying to get more Republicans. We're going to have the Biden Republicans. But as far as the left, they actually push them and shun them away.
By the way, the moment that you get a Biden Republican, you have to hold those Biden Republicans. Like, think of it as Carmen is back, by the way. So excellent. We're glad you're back, Carmen.
Okay.
But the reaching for the Republican thing is a big deal. When Rahm Emanuel said we're going to have the Biden Republican, what does he think they're going to have to do to keep those? The fact of the matter is they want those Biden Republicans because they believe that they are more in line with their thinking in regards to economics, in regards to issues of war, than any lefty. That's the people who they want to reach out for, and they explicitly did that during the DNC convention. Carmine, you're back. Now, you were making the point that basically we were pushing back on this notion that the left controls the party, or controls Biden. And you're making the point you believe that it does. Now, is that just a talking point, or do you actually believe that the left, who has no power at all in the party, that is basically marginalized and destroyed, by the way, by the Democratic machine during the primary process, that they are actually, in fact, behind the scenes, a hand and a puppet to Joe Biden?
Actually, I have a point to make about that too. But yes, I do believe that ultimately they are controlling it. But I have a point to make about that too. I was talking to a friend of mine last night. He's a gigantic Bernie supporter. And he's complaining about how the DNC cheated. He doesn't trust the DNC. And he wouldn't be surprised if they did try to cheat in the regular election, this and that. He hates the DNC. I said, let me ask you a question. Did you vote for Hillary Clinton? He said, yes. I said, are you going to vote for Joe Biden? He said, yes. I said, well, then why should they change?
Yes! Yes! Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. That's my argument. Like it's rational.
If they keep kicking you and you keep doing what they say, why should they change?
It's rational. Utterly rational.
Well, go one further.
I'm so glad you told him that. And what did he say when you said that?
Yeah,
He just smiled because he didn't really have an answer.
That's what I mean. Garland, that's what I mean. Carmen, that's what I mean. That horse,
and
powerful,
in fact,
standing out in the cold in the rain, beaten, not realizing it doesn't have a rope on him, and yet stands there. It's a sad image.
Carmine, and to take it one further, if you give someone what they want and they don't give you anything in return, you're incentivizing them to continue to do that. What you're saying to them really is, you don't have to give me anything. I will support you anyway. At that point, Carmine, what you're saying to them is, look, don't worry about it. You don't need to listen to me. I'm going to give you whatever you want. But anyway, continue, Carmine. What are your thoughts on this?
My friend, you just described a large portion of the black electorate. The Democrats haven't given them anything in forever. They're out there voting for him.
Wait. That's not true. That's not true. Clyburn said that they gave him Kamala Harris.
Yeah, there we go.
So now here's why I say the far left does control them eventually. Because the money people, the people like Soros behind them, they have a far left agenda. But see, what the Democrats do, they're not going to implement all these far left ideas quickly. They play the long game. They do things over time. They put the idea in the media. They have Hollywood support the idea. And over the course of 10 years, what was a crazy idea, when people said, no, hell no, all of a sudden it becomes an acceptable and then a wanted idea, and then they pass it. You can look at gay marriage. You can look at universal health care. All these things that people thought that's never going to happen. There's no way that people cannot, no, the people are not going to want that, Eventually, they get their way. It's not quick, but it's eventual. I mean, I can't think of anything that they've wanted that they have not got. I believe 100% that they will get all of those things that they asked for.
But Carmine, gay marriage is not a question of just policy. I mean, it is, but you're also talking about determination of individuals. Now, look, I I am a lefty in like I said, identification, but I also tend to be pretty libertarian on a lot of this stuff. The government should not tell people. Look, I am even against the government being behind marriage stuff. If 3 people wanted to get together in some kind of union, great. I'm the guy who says get rid of drug laws. So I can be pretty extreme on this stuff. But you understand that there's a difference between, let's say, a policy on Medicare for all versus having 2 people being able to make a choice on whether they want to be together or not.
Mm-hmm.
I guess what I'm saying is there's a difference between corporate policy, where you're talking about like economic policy, where this stuff moves to the right, versus individual determination or issues of identity, that from a standpoint of the wealth of the nation, or look, a corporation doesn't care of racial stuff. And so that stuff happens. I agree with you. But from the standpoint of economic policy and ensuring that the public has more of what it earns, that part, that's the thing that is off the table in regards to conversation. I think issues of class, issues of wealth, those are the issues that I tend to focus on, because I think those are the issues that really get to the heart of, honestly, both parties being controlled by basically the same groups.
Yeah. So let me throw this at you, Carmine. Because this is what I've argued, and a lot of people who kind of leave that 2-party kind of way of thinking look at it like this. When it comes to Wall Street, the banks, the big corporations, they're going to get what they want by both parties. They will be in absolute agreement. Bailouts, absolute agreement. When it comes to foreign policy, absolute agreement with few. It's going to be the same policy. It's just maybe a different enemy. One party hates this country, the other party hates the other country, but it's going to be the same thing. When it comes to the things that absolutely concretely determine the future of this nation and the direction of this nation, they're going to agree. And they're going to argue around these social issues and divide us with these social issues that, in my opinion, neither of those parties really care about. The truth of the matter on these social issues, I don't think either of these parties want them resolved, because that's the only thing they have left to divide the people and argue over, because they agree on the big things that most of the people want the troops home from Afghanistan. Most of the people are sick of being taken to the cleaners by Wall Street, but they agree on those. So they can only argue about the things around the edge that they don't want resolved, because that's what they use to divide us. Carmine, go ahead.
Well, there's a lot of truth to what you just said. There is a lot of truth to what you said. I want to, by the way, I'm going to go on record. I'm actually pro-gay marriage, not as a Christian. I would not ask the church to do it, and I don't personally believe in it, but I am pro the state allowing it, because as a state issue, it's part of the pursuit of happiness, in my opinion, and you can't deny a group of people that. That being said, I agree. I agree with a lot of what you just said. They do keep us divided with those issues, because it's divide and conquer. It's how they keep their power. In the same token, they never really give us any real change. I think that's why Trump scares the hell out of them, because Trump's not a part of that cabal. And so the things he wants to do actually often involve real change. Even on gun control, if he had his way, it would be stricter. There'd be stricter gun control. Like, a lot of people don't realize that. So he doesn't get his way on issues like that. I agree. I think the fringe issues are often used to divide us. But I think defunding the police, I think universal health care, I think these are becoming mainstream issues. Like I said, the Democrats have planted that seed, and those seeds have grown. And they're becoming mainstream issues. And I see a point where that is going to happen. And look, major Democrat-run cities are defunding the police. That's happening now.
That's true. I mean, but is it... And let me ask you this. If your society requires things, and your society deems it necessary to have those things, let's say universal health care, for example, how is it wrong? Like, if 88%, or let's say 70% of the public say, yeah, we want this. You're in the middle of a pandemic. What is the argument against it? I guess I don't fully grasp what's the argument against that particular item if the public is saying, yeah, we agree with it.
Yeah, the public also said they wanted Barabbas. The public is notoriously easily led, bro. I mean, the public doesn't understand what universal health care would actually do to the economy. The public just says, oh, something free? Okay. And they don't get it. They don't get what the actual payment is on that something free.
So what else do you have other than a democratic choice? Meaning, if you're basically arguing that, look, I don't care what the public wants. I don't care that 69% of the public wants universal health care in the midst of a pandemic, whatever that means, meaning Medicare for all in the midst of a pandemic. I don't care. The public is not the last and determining factor of its own will. Is that the argument that you're really making?
Wait, I'm sorry. You have to repeat that.
Okay. What I'm asking you is, if the public is saying to the tune of 69% that it wants Medicare for all, and you just said the public is easily led, bro, the public can want all sorts of things. And I'm asking you, if you're in a representative government or a democratic system, and the public is saying, this is what we want in the midst of a pandemic, what else do you have? Like, it sounds like your argument is basically, I don't care what the public wants.
Yeah, pretty much.
Wow. I appreciate the honesty. I appreciate the honesty.
You came clean about it.
Let's yeah, I appreciate the honesty. Carmine, where can people find your stuff?
You can always hate me at Carmine Sabia on Twitter. I'm the same on Facebook, and please send your hate mail via DMs. Because
no, you're not going to get hate mail. This is Fault Lines. You have people on the right and the left. No, I appreciate the honesty. You're listening to this is Carmine Sabia, writer and editor at large at thesabiareport.com. Carmine, thank you for joining us, man. I really appreciate it. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Let's take a break. Garland Nixon is joining us for the remainder of the show. We'll be back.
Listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault Lines.
Live from the divided states of America, welcome to your daily inoculation for propaganda. Shane is not here today, so I'm going to kind of read his part. In the left corner, I am the indefatigable, ever vigilant, the last man on the wall, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas. And Garland is here, so Garland is going to say something about the left also. So this gets a little weird when we're
how about
this. Go for it, Garland.
How about this? In the other left corner, or maybe in the crowded left corner, I am political analyst and co-host of The Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon Garland Nixon.
Perfect. That's crowded left corner. This is Fault Lines with Thomas and Nixon at this moment. You know, this is so weird to me, man. You have no idea. For the audience that don't necessarily know, Garland was one of the people that brought me on the show. Cam, one of the new producers, was the person to reach out to me. So this is very bizarre because I was the guy in the other left corner. This is very bizarre. But let's get to the news.
Want to hear something interesting that popped into my mind when we were doing the intro? We were talking about the crowded left corner, and I don't know why it popped into my mind. Propaganda that I was taught in high school, right? And they were basically I bet other people have heard this. And we learned this, in elementary school. Elbow room, cried Daniel Boone. And basically what they were arguing is Daniel Boone and all of these other Americans back in the 1800s, they needed more room. So they moved west. They needed more elbow room. They didn't mention that they were elbowing the Native Americans off their own land. They just act like there was empty land. They needed metaphorical elbow room. And like 90% of coincidentally, as they got that elbow room, 90% of all Native Americans got wiped out.
Isn't that something? Yeah, they don't teach that part. That's the part they leave off.
Yeah.
You know, even the American Revolution, like when we're taught it from the standpoint purely of a Western standpoint. It doesn't get into this notion that part of it was because they wanted to move west, that the Brits didn't necessarily want to have this conflict with the Native Americans. You know, it's like they wanted to expand slavery. Like all of those things became like elements of why this country became what this country was.
And this is interesting because Dr. Greg Horn wrote a book on this, that the British said to enslaved people, if you fight with us, then against the colonialists, if you fight with us, you'll be free. And a bunch of them did, and they put them on ships and they took them to Trinidad and Tobago, where their descendants still live to this day.
We don't get taught that side. Like, you know, I think a lot of people, when they're seeing the chaos and they're seeing all sorts of back and forth, that what the country is trying to do is trying to reconcile itself with its history. And that's never easy. That's always going to have opposition because some people are not necessarily going to want to see their country in a different light. And it's not that your country is changed or different. It's your perspective of that stuff has changed. It's just become a wider context. No, that stuff is, you know, that stuff is really interesting when you get into it. But let's get to the headlines. President Trump has signed a stopgap spending bill past hours before the arrival of a new government shutdown. The deadline for the next spending bill is now December 11th. After Tuesday night's debate, President Trump and former Vice President Joe Biden, the Presidential Debate Commission, has said it will make changes to the debate's format, with an outcry coming from social media in hours following the end of the debate to give the moderator an option to mute candidates' mics. The debate's moderator, Chris Wallace, has expressed regrets about the course of the debate, crying silently in his closet, saying that although he did as well as he could, he also sees a terribly missed opportunity. At a rally in Duluth, Minnesota last night, President Trump was happy with the debate, saying the appearance had higher ratings than any show on the history of television, and saying that he held Joe Biden accountable for 47 years of lies, 47 years of betrayals, and 47 years of failure. Former VP Vice President Joe Biden railed against Trump for being the kind of guy who wouldn't let you join his country club depending on the color of your skin. Joe Biden is the man that worked with segregationists and racists to put black bodies in cages. But he's going after Trump for not letting people join his country club because of his race. American and United Airlines would together be furloughing more than 30,000 staffers starting today, saying the federal airline relief provided by the federal government wasn't enough. The airline said they would need a stimulus of $25 billion to keep employing the workers. Researchers at Harvard and Brown University said the United States needs to conduct far more coronavirus testing every day to control the coronavirus pandemic, analyzing how much daily testing the United States needs to regularly screen people, including nursing home residents, staff, first responders, and teachers. And it said that the bare minimum the United States needs is at least 4 million tests per day for the highest priority people. Some wildfires continue to burn out of control in Northern California, with officials saying that the fourth person has died from the Zog fire, which has burned more than 85 square miles since Sunday. It's also not far from August's complex fire. The National Weather Service has said high temperatures, low humidity, and gusty winds has exacerbated the spread of the fires and worsening conditions for forest fires, and will continue to do so today. An attorney representing Kenosha shooter Kyle Rittenhouse has announced plans to sue Democratic presidential nominee Joe Biden and his campaign for libel after the campaign shared a video last night which suggests the teen was a white supremacist. Reports are also out from NBC News today that the DHS has said to talk about Rittenhouse basically compassionately. That is the news that broke today also. The operator of the Tokyo Stock Exchange said that a computer glitch caused the stock trading to stall today, the worst such glitch since the computerized trading began in 1999. The Tokyo Exchange is the world's third largest by capitalization and say that they plan to resume trading on Friday. You're all caught up. That's the news. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. So we are also taking callers at this point. The number is 202-521-1320. That's 202-521-1320. If you guys are in the area, meaning from the standpoint where in the DC area, you can catch us at 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We're also in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If there is anything that we're talking about that you would like to call in, feel free to do so. I only bite rarely, and I don't think Garland bites too much at all. And again, that's 202-521-1320. Garland.
You know what's interesting?
Go for it.
Good. You know what's interesting, Jamarl, and that was in the discussion with Carmine, and it was something that I brought up, and that was that and you and I both know, because we deal with politics daily. To understand politics, to understand a group, you have to really nuance that group. Who's who in that group? You've got a group of people, whether it's progressives or conservatives or reactionaries, et cetera, but you've got to understand that group. It's interesting that the conservatives look at people who are literally, just at war, who despise each other. The near attendants in the Center for the American Progress people despise the Bernie people with the flaming passion of 1,000 suns. And the conservatives look at those two groups and say, yeah, they're all progressives. They're all the same. And then conservatives, on the other side, that people on our side of the aisle, as it were, would look at, the far, far right, and then look at, all conservatives and say, yep, they're all in favor of the Proud Boys or whatever. And it's politically beneficial for people to group the other side so they can scare their side. But in reality, it's just so much more complicated than that. And I just find it interesting to see people look at a Joe Biden and his record and say, yep, he's the same as Bernie Sanders, and look at what's happened in recent history. In fact, we're only months away from the Biden wing consolidating their power together to take out Bernie and the people that they see as a threat within their party, and then say, here's what we're going to do. We're going over here and join with Republicans, and that Republicans still look at that, or conservatives still look at that and say, yep, they're all one bunch. Tomorrow.
Carmine said something, though, that was really interesting, and he brought up gay marriage. Now, his point wasn't so that he was against gay marriage. His point was this was a policy that was thought outlandish and outside the Overton window that was eventually appropriated and implemented. Meaning, the arc of history is long, but it bends towards fairness. And in this very specific case, I think what he's talking about is, yeah, the Democratic Party might be against those policies right now, but eventually that stuff is going to come to pass when it gets appropriated and accommodated in the party structure itself. That's his point. Not so much, even though they're shorthanding it, and they're like, oh, this is the loony left, they're being controlled by it. Now, I took it as Donald Trump was trying to create a wedge between Biden and elements of the left that may be buying into Biden's shtick. And Trump says this during the debate. He said, you just lost the left. And he says it, you just lost the left. You're taking policy positions strongly now that is against your base. Now, Trump is astonished by that because from the standpoint of Trump, what does he do? He backs his base. The Republican base holds their leaders accountable. And in this very specific case, the Democratic base doesn't. So I think when Trump is looking at this, I think he's looking at it as, I'm going to make an argument to force Biden to repudiate his base. Biden does that. Trump doesn't understand that the base is backing Biden just because they're terrified of him. Like Trump, I think it's a misunderstanding. I agree with you, Garland. The right just seems to misunderstand what takes place in regards to the Democratic Party from the standpoint of the left, or they're just lying about it.
But Jamarl, one could argue that the base did hold their leaders accountable in 2016, and that's why Hillary lost, and that there's a good possibility that even though people say they don't, there's a great concern that they may again, and that Joe Biden may lose for the same reason. But let's go. We got Shelley from Michigan. Shelley from Michigan, you're on the air. What do you have to say about it?
I actually just had a question for you guys. Do you think, regardless if Biden or Trump win, do you think it would be good or possible if Bernie Sanders became Speaker of the House?
Well, he's the Senate. He's in the Senate.
Yeah, he's
so
in
he
the Senate.
could. But Shelley, he's Bernie Sanders, he just doesn't, the mainstream of the party would never let him get a significant position of power. That's the thing about it. Do you think that he's accepted by the, Shelley, that he's accepted by the power brokers in the party enough that they would elevate him to a powerful position?
The party itself, no, but the voters who vote for the people that are in the representative of Congress could sway them to.
Thank you for the call, Kelly.
All right,
We appreciate
thanks a lot.
it.
Louise from Virginia. We've got Louise on.
Oh, Louise, excellent.
Yeah.
Yes.
Louise, you're on.
I'm on. Thanks, Garland. I have a question for Garland, which is, should we even give legitimacy to this farcical situation by even voting? And if we do vote, who does he suggest is worth voting for? Shouldn't we just write in Mickey Mouse or King Kong?
Here's the way I think, Louise. I do believe in voting. I think people should vote for who they believe in. If you believe in Trump or Biden, you should vote for him. If you believe a third party, don't let people, don't let people talk you out of it. Because if we got 100 million people. I'll put it like this. A third party could win if all the non-voters voted for a third party. So I would argue, yes, people should vote, and they should vote their consciences and let the chips fall where they may. Jamal, what do you think?
I think that's an election. I think that's what it should be. I mean, if you're dealing with a representative government, you should vote for people who you think are representing your interests. And, when they're attacking Jill Stein and all this other nonsense, like you said, there was like 100 million people that didn't vote. And the overwhelming majority of voters who don't vote are people of color and people who make under $30,000 a year. Meaning you would think that these will be Democratic constituencies. But the reality of it is they've gotten to the point of believing that voting doesn't affect their material interests. And this gets to the whole idea of, the party structure shifting to the right, where, it's not like the Democratic Party and Republican Party. When Democrats shift to the right, they're just going to agree. Republicans are going to go further to the right. And this gets the whole you have nowhere else to go. Like, it gets into all of that stuff. But at the end of the day, you're right. People should vote who they believe is representing their interests. And if they did that, I think we would have a better country. Like, full stop. I mean, The problem is, though, that when you get two parties that are mainstream parties that realize I don't have to represent the interests of the public, and if both of us decide to not do that, then basically we can run the roost. Basically you've detached politics from real world phenomena, and that has been to the detriment of this country whole hog. Let's do this. Let's take a break. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Thanks for the call, Louise. We'll be back in a moment.
Fault Lines. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We give you the most essential information out there. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
So, Sean, what do you want to talk about today?
Well, Bob, that's easy. I want to talk about the need to stop the development of self-driving cars.
Again, Sean, you're driving me nuts. I think the self-driving car thing's already out of the gate.
No. It's never too late. See, now the leading experts in the field, just pick one, whichever one, leading experts have repeatedly warned us about the dangers of artificial intelligence. Look, I'm telling you, man, we have to stop the robots by any means necessary.
I see what you did there.
Yep.
Tune into our show By Any Means Necessary daily from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time on Radio Sputnik. And don't forget to call in at 3:20 p.m. to our studio number 202-521-1320.
And if you miss us live, check us out on SputnikNews.com, Spreaker, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts to stay up to date on the latest political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I am joined by my guest host, Garland Nixon. Right now, we're going to be joined by Wyatt Reed. Wyatt Reed is a Sputnik News analyst and producer for By Any Means Necessary, which airs on Radio Sputnik Monday through Friday from 2 to 4 p.m. Wyatt, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks so much for having me on.
Absolutely. I wanted to have you on because I was watching the protests as they were happening for Breonna Taylor. Now, when it's been asked that the grand jury testimony basically be disclosed to the public, if I'm not mistaken, has been approved. And, there's an outrageous aspect to this. That even though you can understand, all right, I see how the law can come to the conclusion that they came to, but it's outrageous that that's the conclusion. That basically the person who did not hit Breonna Taylor is the one that gets prosecuted. And it's not prosecuted for anything dealing with Breonna Taylor at all. It's prosecuted because the bullets went elsewhere and they could have put other people in danger. The reality of this is that happens all the time. And cops are typically not prosecuted for something like that. And so this prosecution becomes, we just want to stop people from burning stuff down, so we just need to get any prosecution, whatever the prosecution is, to put it on this case. And that's basically what happened. And the public, because of that, was outraged and went out and protested. Now, there were marches in D.C. There were also rallies, of course, in the areas to which this happened. From your standpoint, what did you observe in the rallies and the protests that were in D.C.?
Well, I observed a lot of anger, a lot of outrage, a lot of feelings that the system itself is sort of going through a crisis of legitimacy. As you correctly noted, there seems to be a two-tier justice system at play, right? We have police officers who are indicted for the apparent crime of not correctly shooting Breonna Taylor. That seems to be the legal rationale at play. And I think that more and more people are waking up to this reality. So, of course, it's no surprise to see this kind of outrage manifest in the streets. As it occurred in Washington, D.C., this past Saturday night, I witnessed a fairly popular march. In terms of numbers, I hadn't seen that kind of numbers, at least for a few weeks, a couple months perhaps. Well over 100 people were out expressing their contempt for a system that seems to have nothing but contempt for them. And this manifested itself in largely peaceful protests. I mean, you have anytime something this outrageous occurs, there's probably going to be some minor property damage at some point. Something might get spray painted. Somebody might spray paint justice for Breonna Taylor or justice for Deon Kay. That is to be expected. And then, of course, what is also to be expected is this fairly absurd and clearly disproportionate police response, which largely consists of generally unprovoked arrests, cops on bicycles coming in at high speed, trying to take protesters by surprise and kind of pick them off. Whoever they'll see someone get a little bit further away from the demonstration, and that's when they move in. They come in, fly in on bicycles, completely surround them, knock them to the ground, clear them to the ground. It was raining Saturday night when I witnessed the last three arrests, which, as far as I'm aware, the last three arrests that D.C. police have made of protesters. So those who they threw on the ground were soaked. The last person who I saw get thrown on the ground when they were being arrested and removed, their face was badly bruised. So, this is something that is becoming more apparent is an intentional tactic by the police, a method of intimidation, a method of cracking down on resistance and attempting to ensure that people do not feel safe, do not feel comfortable going out to protest, knowing that they could be brutalized by the police at any point in time.
Wyatt, what's interesting with the Breonna Taylor issue also is, and, having my background in law enforcement, this is what I think about. The things that happened that created this event, that people, when you look at what happened, the person, the so-called target of the search warrant, they already had in custody. So when you look at this, what happened, this system that creates this, where you already have the target of your investigation in custody, but you're still going to do a no-knock warrant. You're going to bust in somebody's door. You're going to come flying in there. And certainly if you break into anyone's house, it's not, let's face it, the conservatives argue all the time. You should have a gun and you should be able to protect yourself from someone who comes breaking in your door. That's their argument. That's why you should have a gun, to protect, that, and you should be able to overthrow the government. But that's a whole nother discussion. But when you look at what happened, I don't think there's enough discussion into how this came about, who made the decision, accountability for who made the decision that looked at this and said, okay, I think here's a good plan. Let's go break down the door after we've already taken the suspect into custody and cause this kind of a ruckus. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think if anybody else in any other line of work did something like that, they would be out of the job within minutes. If you just, the absolute lack of accountability at every single level in this case is, I would say, stunning, but I think given the treatment of police who murder unarmed Black people in general in this country, I don't think you can say that's necessarily stunning. It is certainly disappointing, fairly depressing.
Am I wrong in saying that this case in and of itself is not the outrage? Like, if this happened once, then people would be angry, they would be upset, but there's not necessarily protests. There's not rioting. There's not none of that. It's the fact that this happens over 1,000 times a year. That's the outrage. And each case may not necessarily be the same, fair enough. But you're talking about cops killing 1,000 people a year. And with accountability at 1%. Meaning, of those people who get killed, 1% of the cops gets charged. And when you're looking at cases, case after case after case after case, the cop is behaving poorly. There's some cases where you look at it and you be like, okay, fair game. Or I could see how that becomes a fair game, even though the person got killed. The person shouldn't have did that. But if you're looking at the case where that autistic kid gets killed in Salt Lake City, Utah, I was in a hospital watching that, horrified, where her mom calls to say, hey, can you deal with my kid who's kind of acting out because he's autistic? I think it was like a 14-year-old. And they end up shooting the kid. And the mom is watching them as they murder her kid. I make the point that the outrage in this is that this happens more often than not. And it's only recently where people have started putting an eye on it and they started prosecuting or looking into how to prosecute this stuff. But the outrage in the Breonna Taylor case is that this happens over 1,000 times a year.
And that Breonna Taylor literally did nothing wrong. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
That's another important fact to make. And she did not only did she do nothing wrong, she was just so correct in how she was living her life and how she was basically getting her life together, that now the right wing is forced to just come up with lies to defame her, even in death, accusing her of being some kind of drug dealer or some participant in drug deals, accusing the boyfriend of having, or supposedly she wasn't even in bed. They basically are trying to pick apart the narrative, citing these extremely questionable police reports. Which again, what is a police report, right? It is the lie that all the police have gotten up and come down and sat down and figured out, okay, we got our story straight. This is the story. We're sticking to it. That's what a police report is, especially in a case like this with Breonna Taylor, where it's very, very clear. Even now, right? We see these emails coming out from the police involved in this who said, it was a good kill or a good shooting and we should be celebrated and we're being demonized. You see this, right? There is no sense of accountability. There's not even a shred of awareness of why people might be so outraged that they're going out and murdering unarmed civilians on a matter of regularity. And so I think, at this point, it's hard for me to really drum up any kind of outrage whenever, somebody engages in some minor act of property destruction or vandalism in the street when they're being subjected day in and day out to this unending, ceaseless river of police terror and violence. Not at all surprising to me that that the outrage isn't as focused as some would want to be. Certainly says very little about the police and their tactics of terror, which I think largely we should keep the focus on in general, because they're the ones that hold all the power in this. Right. We see this with the car attacks where, this woman in California and Linda Yorba who's facing life in prison for essentially driving through a bunch of Trumpers who surrounded her car and were smashing on the windows. And then we compare this to the guy in California a few months ago who drove his car directly at his massive lifted truck directly at a bunch of BLM protesters. And he had just an absurd amount of ammunition and weapons in the truck. He was creating some kind of training camp for far-right activists at a vineyard, and we see him being charged with a maximum of 5 years in prison. So this larger political dynamic of who the police view as a legitimate human being and who they do not, I think it's never going to go away until it's actually addressed at the core, at the root of the issue, in the legal system and in the education system, and especially, in all forms, all aspects of our political system.
Wyatt, thank you for coming on, man. I really do appreciate it. This is Wyatt Reed, Sputnik News analyst and producer for By Any Means Necessary, which airs on Radio Sputnik Monday through Friday, 2 to 4 p.m. Garland, when I look at our political system, I don't look at it in points. The decision space constrains the closer you get or the further you get into a situation. Meaning, whereas you might have started off with a particular bit of logic and a particular bit of agency, the further along you go within a time span, your decision space gets less, especially if the decisions you're making were not necessarily good. And in our system, we've allowed entrenched poverty, we've allowed this distinction between the poor, who's gotten poorer, and the rich, who's gotten fantastically richer. And you get inequality, you get racial difference, and you get protests at some point. And in our country, you have this weird reaction to protests that, as opposed to dealing with the material concerns of the people who are out there, to dealing with their issues, the response is not to. And then you get right-wingers who say, we're protecting property, and goes out, kill protesters. This is a recipe for disaster. And I got to be honest, I don't know how this reconciles without dealing with the real concerns of our population. I mean, it's about a minute to respond, but what do you think about that? I mean, because I don't think this starts off, I don't think it's easy to deal with at the ends. It's something that you have to kind of deal with in regards to the logic of the way your system operates.
Right. And it gets back to like the original Civil War, which the shooting stopped. But, I always argue the South lost the war and won the peace. And that is there's fundamental differences. There are people protesting and they really believe in what they're protesting. And there are people that just basically believe we don't believe in what you're protesting for. I've always believed this. It comes down to this argument. There are people who believe in a hierarchical social and economic system with a system of hierarchical rights. And there's a system of people who believe in universal rights. And that's that battle, that everybody should have the same expectation of rights, regardless of what station they were born in life. And I think that argument was what the Civil War was about, and that is the argument that was about women's suffrage and gay rights, et cetera. And it always comes back to that hierarchical rights versus universal rights. And the people who believe in hierarchical rights won't even accept the premise that of universal rights. And so it's as they say in Zen, the tiger and the shark can never fight because they have no common ground. And I think that's what we run into.
You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas Stranahan. We'll be back in a moment.
Fault Lines. Catch all the breaking global political and economic news as it happens. Sputnik brings an all-star lineup with expert opinion from some of the biggest names in the news today. Noam Chomsky.
Turkey, U.S. ally, their main goal is to attack the Kurds, the one ground force opposing ISIS. And there have been a kind of a funnel for support of ISIS, not officially, but in practice.
Peter Sunde, co-founder of the Pirate Bay.
We don't have any sort of democratic control over the internet. And I think that we're very naive when we think that the internet itself is intrinsically good. It's not. It's just a very neutral technology that is being used for good things, but more and more being used for evil things.
Icelandic Foreign Minister Gunnar Bragi Sveinsson.
Increased activities in the Keflavik airbase, and that has to do with more activities from the Russian Northern Fleet in the ocean around Iceland, and also, of course, these usually flights of the bombers.
Robert F. Kennedy Jr.
We're the ones that destroyed the government of Libya. We're the ones that, in a pipeline dispute, that helped destroy the government of Bashar al-Assad in Syria. We're the ones who invaded Iraq.
Former U.S. Secretary of Defense William Perry.
The hostile relationship between the United States and Russia today is dangerous for both countries, not because either country would actually want to start a military conflict, but because there's always a danger of blundering.
Sputnik talks to the brightest minds in politics and current affairs to find out what's really happening. Tune in. Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined by Garland Nixon as a guest host. Joining us for this 30-minute break, for this 30-minute segment, is James Carey, co-editor at Geopolitics Alert. James, welcome to the show.
Good morning. Good to be back.
Absolutely. So I ran across a story on child soldiers in Yemen that basically Saudi Arabia was using. Let's say it this way. Governments have a tendency to use proxies. When I was in Kenya, my cab driver, we got into a conversation. We were talking about basically the U.S. buying soldiers in Kenya to go into other countries and attack. We have situations where, of course, in Syria, where we were, again, dropping billions of dollars, even by New York Times standard, into basically terrorists to go out and try to topple the government of Bashar al-Assad, while you had others who were trying to fight the other terrorists. It was a bizarre mix. Turkey, same thing. Basically, countries buying people to go out and fight their wars. Well, Saudi Arabia in the war with Yemen apparently was doing the same thing, but they were doing it based on a UN report with children. And there were child soldiers that Saudi Arabia were paying in Saudi currency to go out and fight their wars in Yemen. What do we know about this? Like, I mean, this is horrifying, to put it mildly, but in a weird way, there's a rationality to it from the standpoint of the kid who either is going to be subjected to that war and starvation, or more likely, or they can get involved in it. What do you know about this? What is the latest on this?
I mean, the latest is that this still goes on, clearly. Saudis and UAE have been accused of recruiting child soldiers from inside Yemen in this most recent conflict. They've also, obviously used mercenary forces from desperately poor countries such as Sudan. You're right. There is a kind of moral quandary here because people, such as in Syria after it was devastated, I mean, people need money and people will sign up with someone who can pay them. And, at the same time, though, it's devastating that it has to be children or that, we hire the types of mercenaries that we do or that our allies do. I understand why people take the money, but at the same time, there shouldn't be a need for children fighting anywhere, obviously.
Hello?
This report...
To put this further in perspective, by the way, the U.S. bankroll helped start this war. The New York Times has this amazing report where they talk about how the Obama administration wanted to get the JCPOA accomplished, meaning we want to get the deal over. And they didn't want Saudi Arabia to have any kind of influence in the deal, meaning they didn't want them to try to kneecap it or somehow inhibit it. And so when the Yemen issue came up and Saudi Arabia wanted to invade Yemen, Obama greenlit it, despite the fact that they report, indeed in New York Times, that he understood it was likely going to be a bloody conflict that ultimately wasn't going to go the way they thought it was going to go, meaning it's not going to be this easy conflict. And here we have starvation, attacks. We find out that the U.S. was basically assisting Saudi Arabia in pursuit of this war. And now, like you said, we have child soldiers that are put in this unenviable position that they understand that my parents and whatnot are going to starve. My parents may be subjected to all sorts of issues in this war. And my plight in this is either to, do I just want to stand here and be, let's say, at the whims of this stuff, or do I want to get involved? Like you said, that is a horrible position to put anybody in, let alone a child. Has there been any movement by the United States on this front where there's any level of pressure, any level of concern, or for that matter, any level of even recognition that reports like this are coming out from the UN?
I've never seen any real recognition of this. I've never seen any real, I mean, you've seen some votes against
Saudis in the Senate or in the House when they commit a war crime with a U.S. bomb or something like that. But as far as the state of who's fighting in the conflict in Yemen, that's never discussed. And I think the most predatory one is Saudi Arabia and going to Sudan, a country that's been through a civil war in the last decade, and recruiting children, from desperately poor families. And the fact that Saudi Arabia is going off continent to buy children to fight in their war, and that's being done with U.S. support, isn't even discussed here. It shows how little that it's, human life to Americans, it's not considered unless it's on television, and the larger ramifications of war, of course, are never obviously thought out in this country. But when you talk about a war like Yemen, I mean, it's truly a very multinational conflict. The UAE is in conflict with Saudi Arabia. Both are hiring child soldiers from different countries and from inside Yemen. The Houthi accused of having children fight with them. But again, remember, these are children who live in Yemen and are being bombed by the Saudis every day. So again, another unenviable position. But it's not discussed here because I don't think we think of human life on the battlefield here like that. We don't, unless it's our troops, we don't really think about that. That's why every war has always been about boots on the ground or not.
Well, James, the other thing is, at a time when the U.S. is right now, I'm looking at an article right now, Trump announces new sanctions targeting Assad regime over human rights abuses. Every other day, there's another one. Pompeo urges Vatican to condemn human rights abuses in China. And that is that while the Saudis literally cut people up with bone saws while they're still alive and use child soldiers and slaughter Yemenis by the thousands, attacking hospitals and homes and farms and everything, the U.S. runs around the world, sticking our chest out, saying that we are the protector of human rights for the world, when in fact it's simply, just craven, ironic, self-centered positions by the U.S. that are nothing but, going for geopolitical advantage. And it's just, kind of sickening. What are your thoughts on the U.S. and this whole move around the world for human rights abuses while we are, involved in human wrongs in the Middle East and other places?
The human rights thing is obviously, you guys know as well as I do, when it's deployed by the U.S. State Department, it's a ploy. I mean, they do it all the time. The fact that they talk about China, supposedly genociding Muslims, and to think that the State Department under like Mike Pompeo cares about the human rights of Muslims somewhere is ridiculous. And again, like you said, sanctioning Syria and starving these people who have just been through a U.S. imposed war. And then you have Yemen, which is essentially a genocide, but that's a U.S. supported bombing and a U.S. supported blockade. But we don't talk about that one because, we don't talk about any of these really. We don't talk about the damage sanctions do, but we talk about human rights because that's the only way to get this sort of liberal interventionism that started in the 90s. That's the only way to tug on people's heartstrings to this point that justifies us, the narrative of us doing good justifies whatever we choose to do, whether it be sanctions. And, like I said, Americans don't think about other people's lives. We don't think about what sanctions mean. We don't think about what it would be like if there was no medicine in the drugstore suddenly or no food on the shelves. We thought about it during the pandemic, and what did we do? We all tore each other apart and things got worse. So, I mean, we don't think about what sanctions do to lives in other countries, and we don't think about what our supposed punishments for, even more false human rights violations. We don't think about what those do to other people. I mean, people don't think. Look at Venezuela, where people say, oh, this is socialism's fault, and we don't even talk about the 10, years or more, really, since Chavez was elected, like 20 years ago, of sanctions and the coup attempt against him. We never talk about that. That doesn't come up because Americans don't think about how this stuff affects people and how that those effects on a population, such as in a country like Venezuela or Iran or Syria, how that would make them feel about the United States.
Isn't that weird, though? Like, we never take our actions into consideration. We always just take the response. Like, so, we would see, for example, Obama will come out and say Venezuela is a national security threat. And nobody says how. And, if if Maduro takes a position or says something, all of a sudden it's the thing that he said, not the tenor of the U.S. towards him, that matters. This goes back to the Tillerson memo, right? Where Tillerson gets a memo from one of his, I think it was an underling, that was trying to explain to him that, look, U.S. policy needs to be around U.S. policy. You keep your friends close and you give your friends accolades regardless of what they're doing domestically, because ultimately you want to keep more friends than enemies. And you use foreign policy as a tool to attack people you don't particularly like. So the hypocrisy is somewhat built into the foreign policy to some degree. Why do you think the American population accepts this? Do you think that any population, for the most part, would accept their government behaving this way? Or is it, it's domestic interest matters more? Yeah, we may care about the foreign policy stuff in the abstract, but when you get into real terms, what we care about is what takes place domestically in the country. Is that somewhat of a fair appraisal? Or do you think, no, the American public does care more about this in real terms than I think they do?
I think the sad truth is we care more about stuff that's happening domestically because, as somebody who kind of is on the left, you see this argument in harm reduction to vote Joe Biden this election. And, as far as we're talking for harm reduction for the people of Venezuela or the people of Yemen or the people of Iran, I don't see Joe Biden doing much harm reduction if I vote for him for those people. He may make things slightly better for certain groups of people here, but, and the same can be said for Trump. Either way, he may alleviate suffering here for some people in some way. I don't know that I agree with that, but that may be what some people feel, or that may be true in some way. But that's more of a concern to people than anything going on abroad, because foreign policy, it hasn't even come up this election. It doesn't exist. Biden, I think the most I've heard from him on Yemen is saying he'll end it somehow, but that doesn't mean anything to me because Obama supposedly disapproved of the war too, even though he started it. He helped start it. So I just think that domestically, people do think about their own needs before they think about people in other countries, because we have such an inability to relate to them just due to years and years of the propaganda you get hit with here. And not only that, we have a volunteer military at this point, which is a huge advantage because a lot of people, if you don't want to join the military, you don't have to think about this anymore, and you haven't had to since Vietnam.
Let's talk about that. And the next thing, the president's men. I love you that you mentioned that. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be back in a moment with James Carey, editor and co-founder of Geopolitics Alert. Back in a moment.
Fault Lines. Radio Sputnik. We speak your language. Find us at SputnikNews.com.
Stuck in traffic? No problem. Stay informed. Stay tuned to Radio Sputnik on 105.5 FM or 1390 AM in the Washington, D.C. area. Need more?
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm here with my guest co-host, Darla Nixon. We're joined by James Carey, editor, co-founder of Geopolitics Alert. Hey, James, the president's men. This is a fascinating aspect of our foreign policy. 1% of the military, I think 1 or 2%, but I think it's 1% of the country serves in the military, which means there's a distinction between basically what the military does versus what effects it has on the population, especially if the effects are not necessarily felt by the population. Meaning, if all the effects of military action are only felt externally to other nations, then the nation itself doesn't necessarily have any tether, or there's no leverage, natural leverage, that gets that nation to care about what that military is doing. How do we change that? Is the answer to that a draft? I've heard people make that argument that if there was a draft, that more people would care about what the military is doing. Or is there something else? Because I do get the point, right? That if the military is just at the president's whims, then the country is basically out of that conversation.
Yeah, having a separate military class has been a real boon for the ruling class in this country because, like you said, people are so detached from it. But as somebody on the left, I can't support a draft because I can't support the thousands of Americans who would end up going somewhere to kill someone or be killed for something stupid. I don't think that's the solution.
So how do we create a link where the country cares about militaristic action abroad? I mean, this was stuff that, even at the beginning of the country, there was this warning, like, don't let this happen. And it happened. And the fact that the warning existed meant that it was understood that there's some element or incentive that allowed such like to take place. So how do we establish that link? Garland?
Let me throw this in there too. I remember, a talk I listened to from Chris Hedges, and he talked about the German bureau chief for the New York Times just before World War II, saying that before the invasion of Poland, that he left Germany, and when he came back, he was shocked because the people in Germany all thought Poland was about to attack him, invade him. And he listened to the radio, and he turned on every newspaper, and everywhere he read Poland, who was clearly no match for it. It was absurd to argue that they were going to invade Germany, but all the people believed it because they saw that all the time. I think a perfect example is the conspicuous absence of any discussion of these things that we're talking about during the debates 2 nights ago. I believe the American people, if they were aware of what's going on, would have a different perspective. The issue, I think, is not how the American people believe. It's that now we have a media that is, inculcated with the deep state and the military industrial complex and the very entities in our country, in our nation, who are pushing for war and benefiting financially from war. So I think it's not an accident, and it's not the people. It's that they are being A, propagandized, and B, the information that they need to even have a discussion about this is being withheld from them. James.
Yeah, I mean, one, there's clearly the fight domestically. The fights domestically, as we said, take priority. But at the same time, there's no one who speaks in a language that relates the idea of war in a human way. There's no one. When we see statements about war from other countries or news stories about war with other countries or conflicts with other countries, we see statements from their leaders, and often we'll see war footage or something like that. But it's never an American outlet that'll show you something like, say, Telesur will or Sputnik will, which is the empty shelves in Venezuela, or Cuba sending medicine to countries hard hit by wars that we've started, or, the fact that Iran has a COVID outbreak that they couldn't control because they have no medical equipment thanks to our sanctions. That wasn't discussed. What was discussed was, look how bad Iran is failing, look how bad Venezuela is because of socialism. Those are the things you're pounded with instead. And the human toll is never, ever discussed. It's only, you see Maduro or you see Rouhani on television or something like that. And that's what you see. And then the American leaders, usually CIA analysts and ex-defense experts or whatever, come in on the cable news networks and tell you what to think about these statements. And you see these countries as their leaders and their militaries, and you don't see them as other people. This country has a huge problem empathizing with people in other countries. I was hoping, maybe some shortages and stuff like that would show people what it's like living under these types of conditions all the time during the pandemic early on, but that didn't seem to do it. So I think the only way to do things is to have a discussion where when you talk about starting a war, it has to be about the people who are actually going to be involved and not politicians or somebody who's going to be hit with a drone strike in a palace.
So basically we're stuck. I mean, because so basically we're stuck. I mean, because Garland's right. I mean, when you look at the media, what was it? Brian Williams, when Donald Trump gets in office, he fires off a missile in Syria. That missile, if I'm not mistaken, killed X number of people. And Brian Williams, who sits there and says, what is it, a light or a fires in the night or something like that, he was pushed to poetry in that moment of violence. I do think that's endemic of our media space and our political space. And unfortunately, I don't know what an answer is to get past that. How do you approach this as a solution or as a way of trying to resolve this in any particular way, or push this kind of conversation in any particular way, in a way that we become less hostile, or are we just stuck with it in this kind of momentum of sorts?
I mean, maybe things have to start at home, because we're clearly at war with ourselves for one thing, and there's not even a sort of like cross. There's no class consciousness or any type of thing like that, or a type of us versus them. As far as the ruling class goes, there's no type of class war consciously going on here except by the ruling class. So I think the idea that we first need to see each other as humans, which is hard because this is a country built on just punishing your enemies. And that is what we do abroad. And that is what people vote for here, too. You know, people vote for Trump and even Biden, the same thing. They want to see Trump. They just want to see Trump out. They don't even like Biden that much. This country is just built on a system where politics is just punishing people you don't like, not finding solutions for anything. It's just about hurting someone out. So until we have a system where we actually, our desire isn't just to bring harm to our fellow Americans and not even care about the bipartisan consensus abroad that they run the whole time. As long as we continue doing that and aren't even willing to look out for each other, I mean, I don't see how we have a conversation about people abroad. So it has to start here. I know that's very idealistic and it sounds very hippie, and I don't normally say anything like that. But I don't know what else to say.
I think you're right. And I think, sometimes we don't want to admit that the reality that what you're saying, yes, it sounds idealistic, but it's true. And oftentimes the truth is far-fetched. The truth is not something that's going to happen. So you have to face the reality. If that's not going to happen, then we're going to continue heading in the same direction that we're heading. Yeah. When you look at a China or some of these countries that have they have a 5-year economic plan. They have a 50-year economic plan. We don't have a 5-second plan. No. We don't even know what we're going to do in 2 weeks. And that, to me, explains why the U.S. is going in the direction which is going, which is, both engines on fire and heading towards the ground at 32 feet per second. James.
Yeah, there's the accelerationist argument that maybe some type of shared misery will bring us all together, but we already share in a huge misery, and I don't see that happening right now. We just shared in a huge misery for like 6 months and aren't even out of it yet, and we aren't really any better for it. So I don't know. I think that we look at a bleak future unless we start identifying with each other, and maybe something like a Sanders campaign or something like that can do it again, but it'll have to be somebody more radical. It's getting late. The hour is pretty late for this country, and I don't know. We may have missed our off-ramp.
No, I feel you, James. I mean, basically, it's people need to be able to see each other as themselves to some degree. This idea of threat, this idea of fear of the other, and all of this other stuff, the tribal politics. There needs to be some level of people recognizing other people or recognizing some aspect of themselves in other people, whether that's through poverty, meaning let's get rid of that. I think China has an anti-poverty plan where at the end of this year, they're going to have all the people out of extreme poverty. That goes to what Garland's saying, these kind of plans. This is the richest country on the planet. And at the end of the day, we choose the lowest common denominator that we're willing to accept. And unfortunately, that has been a pretty low common denominator, whether it's here or whether it's abroad. I want to get into something else. There was leaked documents that put out that there was a propaganda operation in Syria. Now, if you're watching Radio Sputnik, we basically told you that. If you were watching my channel, we told you that. If you were watching Garland probably told you the same. Can you give us the details on the information and the documents that have come out kind of getting across what was taking place in regards to actions by Western governments in order to the propaganda operation in that country?
I recently saw the report on the chemical weapons attacks. Is this what you're referring to?
Well, Aaron Matei had been making reference to basically the OPCW and basically the leadership and the change. Basically, that there were several leaked documents by the OCPW that got across that the chemical weapons that were dropped weren't necessarily dropped at all. Oftentimes they were placed, or beyond being placed, that it seemed that many of the people were being pushed out and the report was being changed in order to give this notion that there were chemical weapons that were dropped. But this one comes from your report, and I'll just read part of it. Leaked documents show how the UK government contractors develop an advanced infrastructure of propaganda to stimulate support for West for Syria's political and armed opposition. Virtually every aspect of the Syrian opposition was cultivated and marketed by Western government-backed public relation firms, from the political narratives to their branding, from what they said to where it was said. That's astonishing.
Yeah, that's very much true. I mean, that was seen from day one in Syria. There was the American, there was what was for American consumption, and there was what was for domestic consumption among the Syrian groups. A lot of the stuff the Syrian groups said, when people would find it on like Twitter or Telegram, they would start to ask questions about, why are we supporting these people? Because the things they said for their fellow, quote unquote freedom fighters in Syria were pretty brutal. A lot of things about the minority religious sects needing to be completely eliminated. But then when it came to the United States, we had talk about the Free Syrian Army and all these, ex-commanders who had defected and blah, blah, blah. And a lot of stuff about how
1 minute
democratic forces and how these were an organized fighting force that was somehow secular or like I said, democratic was what we were really sold. That was the big word. But a lot of people knew from very early on, just like I said, even following a lot of these rebel leaders on Twitter, you saw what they said domestically, and it was a lot different from what you were hearing in U.S. media. So, again, I mean, I've talked to Garland. We've talked in interviews about this for years, that we've known, especially like the Turkish proxies in Syria, the Saudi proxies. We've known about these groups for a long time.
Yeah, absolutely. And they've just, it's basically a propaganda operation for our consumption. James Perry, I really want to thank you for coming on, man. This is editor, co-founder of Geopolitics Alert. I also want to thank my co-host, Garland Nixon, at this moment for helping us out. Shout out to the engineers, Andre, producer Rakeem, welcome back, Cam, and of course, Shane. Get well soon. You guys will see you tomorrow. You all stay safe. Thank you very much. We'll be back tomorrow. Fault Lines with Thomas Shane. Guys, I want to thank all of you for joining us. I want to send a shout out to Garland Nixon. Thank you, man. I appreciate you for coming on the show. Shane wasn't feeling well, and so he wasn't necessarily confident that the fever and all this other stuff would just lead into a great show. And Garland was nice enough to come on in order to kind of make the gap in the middle of the show. So, definitely. I want to thank all of you for joining us for another show, Fault Lines, Thomas Stranahan. You will be seeing me maybe for next hour or so. There are a few shows that I tried to do yesterday. I was having technical difficulties in getting them up and running. But so far, everything looks great today. So thank you guys for joining us. And I will see you guys shortly. Let me just make sure I didn't miss any comments. God, I hate the way Google has changed their stuff. All right. Good. All right, guys. I'll see you guys in probably 30 minutes or so. Thanks all.